Well, Titans fans, ESPN might have spent the entire draft not wanting to talk about you, but I promise I've got you covered. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 31 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season with a deep dive into the Tennessee Titans. Enter Cam Ward for a pretty young football team. Coach Callahan in year 2 here. Really a pretty straight narrative on this Titans team, coming in ranked pretty low, but hopeful that the young quarterback can play well, that some of these young pieces that we're going to talk about here today can step up, and maybe by midseason or by end of season, we are talking about this as a much more potent, competent football team than where we have them ranked here at 31 heading into this season. Very much looking forward to today's video. As we get started, if you guys could do me a huge favor, take just a second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy little thing that really does support this channel. It tells YouTube to push this video out to other Titans fans and other NFL diehards just like you. Of course, if you enjoy this series, do make sure you are subscribed. We've got 30 more of these coming out over the course of the next 100 days as we lead up to the NFL opener. And lastly, make sure you don't go anywhere with this video because we have another awesome guest for today's deep dive. James Foster making his return to the Titans deep dive. Genuinely one of my favorite people to talk football with, and we got into a lot of nitty-gritty evaluation talk about some of the young players on this team in our interviews, so you're not going to want to miss that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, as always, taking a look at this team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse, position by position. Of course, with the coaching staff, no change there. It will be year 2 of the same regime with Coach Callahan and Denard Wilson running the defense. But as far as the offensive roster is concerned, really upgrades to slight upgrades across the board with a lack of any notable downgrades. So certainly hoping that the core roster talent is going to be better than what they were working with last year. And the biggest hope there and assumption here is that getting Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick is going to be an upgrade over a season of Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. Would be pretty disappointing if this isn't an upgrade, but I think it's fair to suggest that this will be an upgraded room. At running back, leaving this as neutral, it's going to be the same players back with the addition of 6th round pick Khalil Mullings out of Michigan. At tight end, going to say slightly upgraded. The only loss there is veteran Nick Vanette, and I liked Gunnar Helm in the 4th round out of Texas enough for me to say that that tight end room should be at least a little bit better here in Gunnar Helm's rookie season. But then the big ones, the Titans and Chris Borgonzi, the new general manager coming in, were very busy overhauling both the wide receiver room and the offensive line here, starting with wide receiver. A lot of movement here, so long-term starting piece, Nick Westbrook-Akine on the way out. He heads to Miami. Tyler Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins hardly played for this team. He was shipped off to Kansas City in the first few weeks of last season, but still worth noting he played 16% of the team snaps on the whole last season, so some names on the way out, but nothing too major there. Nick Westbrook-Akine is a nice, solid player, but they bring in Tyler Lockett from Seattle. They were busy in the kind of later portions of the draft and into undrafted free agency, where they get Xavier Restrepo, probably the biggest name undrafted free agent pickup this season. But in the 4th round, they get the deep threat Shamari DK out of Florida and Alec Iomanner out of Stanford. Some nice picks there that we will certainly talk more about when we get to the weaponry portion of the video. And then they bring in Van Jefferson as a budget bin free agent. So basically an entire position room's worth of additions there. Nothing major, though. I think it's fair to say that this group will be hopefully upgraded, but it's still not like massive additions along that wide receiver room. But on the offensive line, I think you can feel even better that that group will be upgraded. This was a group that was very challenging to watch last season, to the point that I actually list the release of Nicholas Petit-Frere as an addition for this team. I think you can make a case that Petit-Frere was the worst player in the NFL last season. I've always said the worst player in the NFL isn't necessarily your lowest rated guys that don't see the field. It's the guys that are actually getting significant playing time and actively hurting your football team. That fits the absolute definition of Petit Frere, who was kind of in and out of the lineup because they didn't have any other answers. But when he was out there, he was a real problem. So they move on from him. That alone is addition by subtraction. But they get their starting center back, hopefully full go. Lloyd Cushenberry played under half of the team's snaps last season. And then the additions, Kevin Zeitler, the veteran guard, and Dan Moore, a very expensive but adequate veteran starter at left tackle, as JC Latham will now slide over to right tackle, in addition to various other cheap, veteran minimum type of depth additions. They really are bringing in 4, 5, 6 new names. All of the veteran variety, not really going to the draft for linemen this year. The one exception there would be Jackson Slater, a 5th-round rookie out of Sacramento State in the developmental category. But they did have some losses. Dylan Raduns, who played almost every snap for this team last year. We just talked about him going to the Saints, where he's competing for a starting job. And then Daniel Brunskill, who was kind of their swing piece along the O-line. They're not worried about losing those pieces, but those guys did play a lot of snaps from last year that need to be replaced. So Dave Borgonzi was very busy with the offense, and then defensively, some spots yes, some spots no. Along the interior of the defensive line, they very much like that group, so that's staying neutral. Really no movement there at all. They did re-sign Sebastian Joseph Day to come back to that group, like getting him back, because that was maybe the team's only strength last season, was interior D-line. But then along the edge, certainly some movement. They finally say goodbye to Harold Landry, who was dead last in pass rush win rate last season. He signs a big deal with the Patriots. And then they bring in 3 new options. In the second round, Olu Oladejo out of UCLA, Draymond Jones coming over from Seattle, and then Lorenzo Carter. So names, certainly. I think 3 is better than 1 in this case, at least having a rotation of poor pass rushers starting in that edge group could help these guys stay fresh and be more efficient. This really is going to come down to what they get from Oladejo as a rookie. We'll talk more about how much of a day one impact he can make as a player later on, but I will say slightly upgraded along the edge group, but nothing major. And then at linebacker, similar to the offensive line for this team, it was going to be very challenging to not be upgraded with this group. They lose 5 players here that got playing time last season. Kenneth Murray being the big one, heads to Dallas. He was mostly their number 1 starter last year, but then Ernest Jones, who played the first third of last team season and then got traded to Seattle for Jerome Baker, who then played and then got either benched or injured or found himself out of the lineup. And then we saw Jack Gibbons and Luke Gifford and this just complete motley crew of linebackers. They just basically wiped the whiteboard clean with that position group for the most part. And they do bring in the veteran Cody Barton, who had a nice season for the Denver Broncos last season. So he alone is better than anything they had for the course of last season, or at least outside of Ernest Jones, who they determined that they didn't want, obviously. Different conversation there. But yeah, Cody Barton's a nice veteran addition that should be an upgrade to that unit, even if they still have work to do. At cornerback, I'm going to say hopefully upgraded. One of their big moves last offseason was to go and get L'Jarius Sneed from Kansas City, and he was kind of available in part due to some durability questions, and turns out he comes out and cannot stay healthy with lower body injuries. So he's still kind of on the mend, it sounds like. They're hopeful he's going to be back for training camp. If he's out there, that is an upgrade, right? But that is up in the air, to say the least. Beyond that, they do say goodbye to Chidobe Awuzie, who himself had a hard time staying in the lineup. He played a third of the team snaps, and then they bring in Marcus Harris in the 6th round of the draft. So really all about L'Jarius Sneed there. They didn't make a ton of additions, so the optimistic spin on that is that they feel good about getting him back, and if they do, that would be an upgrade. But then at safety, I'm going to say upgraded here, man. Swapping Quandre Diggs, who only played 40% of the team snaps last year anyway, for Xavier Woods is a push, in my opinion, at this stage in those guys' careers. But then they get Kevin Winston Jr., one of the steals of this draft, in my opinion, gives some really impressive depth and even the potential for this team to come out in a 3 starting safety defense. So we're going to have some exciting conversations about that. But I do think upgraded at safety. They also lost Daryl Worthy. Daryl Worley. That's hardly worth noting, with all due respect to Mr. Worley. But then special teams, shaking up that room, going with some veterans. Nick Folk was a veteran, played well for them last year. He is not back. And then Ryan Stonehouse, their young punter, is now with Miami. And they go with, I think, a total of about 70 years of age between Joey Sly and Johnny Hecker. Not the end of the world, but I do look at Sly as a downgrade from what they got from Nick Folk last year, and likewise, Johnny Hecker doesn't quite have the leg he used to either, so I said slightly downgraded with special teams. Again, nothing to panic about, but maybe worth noting. So there are your offseason changes. Next up, we are going to go through this coaching staff and what the Titans are going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball here. Before I do that, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, the #1 ticketing app out there, SeatGeek, who has been a tremendous partner for me to work with throughout the years. And because I have worked with SeatGeek for so long, some of you long-term deep dive fans maybe used the old promo code. Well, SeatGeek has set us up with a new code. It is TFG10, so you can get that discount again if you are an existing customer and used one of my old codes. Or, of course, if you are new, go check out SeatGeek. It is the best ticketing app. I buy all of my tickets for football games, obviously, but baseball games over the course of the summer and concerts. Go have some fun. Go see some live music. SeatGeek is going to get you the best prices, the best seats. Their prices are always up to date and competitive with the market. They color code every seats to indicate the best value that you can find out there on the market. They give you pictures of what your seats are going to look like, and you'll get your tickets right there in the app, as opposed to some other ticketing services. You have to climb through email chains, and they make the process of approaching the gate a little more stressful than it needs to. So SeatGeek is the highest rated ticketing app out there for a reason. And again, you use code TFG10, you can save up to $20 on your next ticket purchase and support my channel in the process. So thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's deep dive. But let's now talk about this Titans coaching staff and discuss year 2 of this Brian Callahan regime. It is all the same names from last offseason heading into year 2 here, but it's a big year 2, man. I think the majority of us would agree that year 1 of Brian Callahan in Tennessee was lackluster to underwhelming. And for a guy that was a qualified head coach candidate, but probably not at the top of everybody's list of like slam dunk hires, coming from being underneath Zach Taylor and of course being with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. One of those deals where it's hard to know how much of the credit pie he deserved coming from that Bengals offense. Basically, what I'm saying is, I think the majority of us agree that we really just have no idea if Brian Callahan is the right guy for the job for Tennessee, if he's a great coach, if he's even a great offensive designer, being kind of the offensive guru type of hire here. Not to say he can't be that, but it's pretty damn hard to borderline impossible to say that he is a great coach or that he's doing phenomenal things. It's more of just like, yeah, well, he had Will Levis, who really struggled to see the field and execute the offense, and then he had to go to Mason Rudolph, and they had a tragic offensive line, even though he brings over his legendary dad offensive line coach with him here. And year 1 with Tennessee was obviously a disaster. They get the #1 overall pick, and it just was a year where it was really hard to tell what exactly Brian Callahan was bringing to the table from a leadership perspective, but beyond that, from a schematic point of view. When you're hiring an offensive coach, you want to be able to watch their offense and say, Yeah, I get what they're kind of going for here. This is the scheme. This is what they do well. There's a plan to what they do. They build, they establish a core philosophy, and then they're able to build upon that and really attack defenses in that way. And Brian Callahan's offense was really week to week, play to play. It is hard to watch the Titans from last year and really understand what the plan was, what was working, what was it that they did well. And that, as we turn to year 2, is going to have to be something that Brian Callahan shows us on tape, in my opinion. And the nice thing is, you look at his background in terms of what sort of offenses he's been a part of and what he should be comfortable with schematically speaking. He's kind of got everything in the bag, and that could have actually led to the kind of chaotic nature of what the Titans offense was when he was designing it last year. Maybe he was trying to do a little bit too much potentially, but there's everything in there, right? You got some of the kind of early pro spread coaches like Mike McCoy, Adam Gase, some of the Peyton Manning influences there. You've got the John Gruden kind of pro style north and south run game approach with working with Greg Olson with the Raiders there. He had a year with Gary Kubiak, part of that Shanahan wide zone system. Of course, Zach Taylor himself has had some identity crisis points in his coaching career there in Cincinnati, coming in as a Sean McVay guy, but then with Callahan with him kind of getting into more of a Adam Gase style offense in many ways, kind of a Peyton Manning style offense, if you will. So it's all in there, but to me, I need to see Brian Callahan kind of maybe even simplify things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be simplified, but just really do something well here in Tennessee, whether it's a spread them out shotgun passing game or getting into some of the wide zone style run game that I do think has potential here with 12 personnel and some of these backs and an improved offensive line. But whatever it might be, I do think this is a big year for Brian Callahan to show us what he brings to the table. But I do think in many ways, Brian Callahan is on the hot seat as he heads into the season because for me, it doesn't even necessarily need to be the Titans win a bunch of games. I mean, not being the number 1 pick in the draft next year would certainly be nice. But for me, it's more of does Cam Ward look good? Does the offense have a plan? How are vibes in the locker room? Are things building in the right direction here in Tennessee? Because coming out of year 1, there isn't much to build off of. And even a lot of young coaches that don't win a lot of games in year 1, you can at least look at some of the process and see where you're headed. Right now, we don't really have a strong feel of that with Tennessee, and that's not the best thing to say about a head coach. So obviously not going to rank too high for me with Brian Callahan. I've got him as the 29th head coach right now, even below some rookie head coaches that I just would trust more. So in terms of the offensive coaching, they're a C+ grade for pass game coaching, ranking 21st to 29th there, tied for last for run game coaching. And the overall coaching culture grade is 27th to 30th as well. So that's just all stuff that Brian Callahan, with Nick Holtz next to him, his kind of left-hand man here, they're going to have to prove to us what they can do and start bringing some more to the table coaching-wise for this Titans offense. Now, as far as the defensive coaching is concerned, I feel actually much better about at least Denard Wilson as a defensive coordinator. He was a part of this wave of hires coming out of that 2023 Baltimore Ravens team, and the league really looking at that Mike McDonald system and trying to replicate that around the league. And in year 1, I think Denard Wilson, with a defensive roster that just didn't have much to work with, he did a very good job. The Titans weren't a great defense, but they weren't getting steamrolled. They were top 20 in run defense and had some moments where they were able to keep games tight with their defense. I'm not sitting here trying to say he did this unbelievable job and he's this surefire superstar defensive coach, but very solid, and certainly shouldn't be really any questions about Denard Wilson running this defense, I think, heading into year 2. And if things do go better, I do think the league is going to look at Denard Wilson coming from that Ravens regime and potentially eye him as a head coach candidate. But that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I think you just feel very solid about where he is right now with this Titans team. For me, B- grades across the board, ranking really in the mid-20s for defensive coaching, which, it doesn't sound amazing, but there's a lot of great defensive coaches in the league today. It's much harder to climb those ranks on the defensive side of things than it is for the offensive side of things. But to spend a little bit more time discussing what this sort of new wave, Ravens-inspired, Mike Macdonald-inspired defense is, and why the league is really infatuated by this system right now, well, it really depends where you want to start. There's, to me, two great things that this scheme and coaching philosophy does that are working. And it kind of just depends where you want to start, but I think it's important to talk about what this scheme is from a coverage perspective on the back end, and then what they do that is unique with their front that plays really well into what they're doing in coverage on the back end. So this is from a coverage perspective. If you just look at the splits of like what are they calling in Tennessee and in Baltimore and Seattle and Miami and the Chargers, it is very much a Fangio-inspired coverage playbook, if you will. It's a lot of cover 4 and cover 6 and cover 2, and the same idea of kind of pre-snap, too high defensive structures where you want to prevent the big play, keep two safeties deep over the top, and then use the threat of rotating your safeties, not rotating them on and off the field, rotating them up and down to try to cause chaos and create confusion for the quarterback who thinks he might be getting a cover 4, but then one safety's going to buzz down and one's going to rotate high, or you get into a cover 6 where it's cover 2 on one side and cover 4 on the other side. And that's really the world that a lot of these defenses in the league today want to live in. And I know a lot of you that watch the Saints deep dive are saying, well, you just shredded Brandon Staley for running a lot of those same coverages, for coming from a Fangio tree. Yet you're sitting here praising this system and praising Denard Wilson. And I understand the confusion there, but there are subtle differences in how the coaches from this coaching tree have ran these defenses versus how so many of those Fangio disciples ran them. And the biggest difference I feel when I'm watching these defenses, and there's no like analytics I can find that can confirm this. It's just my eye test having gone through the tape on these teams. But those many plays that, say, a Brandon Staley or a Joe Barry or an Ed Donatel have, where it's 2nd and 8 and you see the corners just 8 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, and there's all this space around the line of scrimmage that teams can just dink and dunk and run at and pick you apart. The idea of just allowing all of that space, these defenses in the Mike Macdonald system and here in Tennessee with Denard Wilson, they run all the same coverage concepts without giving you all of that space. If they're running quarters, instead of having their corners 10 yards off the line, they'll put them 4 or 5 yards off the line. Much more reasonable. If it's 3rd and 2, they will mix things up and go press man coverage. On top of that, they blitz at an incredible rate, which ties into what we're going to say about the front. But these are blitz-heavy attacks, whereas Brandon Staley and all these other Fangio systems are just way more passive as a mentality. So I think in terms of how they call the coverages and the play calls with this defense, they are able to find much of a better balance between conservative, cover 4, cover 6, too high safety stuff, and being aggressive and making some of that easier stuff much harder. And that is a philosophy that you really feel having success within these systems. But they also do something very unique with their front that is very revolutionary and having a lot of success as it permeates throughout the league. But what this system has kind of done is sort of flip the way they coach defensive fronts on its head. So instead of in the past for 40, 50 years of defensive coaching, they would say, here's your playbook, here's all your formations, here's all the different calls with different names within those different formations. Go and memorize these 200 or 300 different blitzes and packages and run defense calls and all this different stuff. Instead of having them learn all of that, the playbook is much more condensed. And instead of coaching things by formation, they coach you by position. So if you're a member of the defensive line or the linebackers, instead of having to learn a full playbook with different formations of, let's just say, up to 300 or so different plays, what they're going to ask is that every member of the defensive line and linebackers knows the assignment of every position, every gap, every alignment on maybe 40 different plays. And that's all kind of a rough estimate and what I've kind of heard through the pipeline of information that I've been able to get from this defensive front. So if anybody knows more about this, or if I'm off, I would love to have conversations with you in the comments. But this is how I've been educated on this system. And by doing that, by making sure every member of the defense just knows basically everything about maybe 40 plays, that simplifies things for you. So you're able to play fast. You're able to play with this kind of hive mind mentality as well, where you understand what everybody else around you is trying to do and what your role is on that play. But what it also does is provide some pretty serious schematic advantages. You can take your defensive line and move them all over the place. You can create matchup advantages for your pass rushers, putting them, taking a D tackle and putting them on a offensive tackle, if that's your best matchup, taking a linebacker and blitzing them into the B gap, whatever creative innovation you want to do for your matchup that week, you can mix and match your fronts and find those matchups. And then what that does to the opposing offense is that you're coming out, and from your perspective on the defense, you're cool, you're comfortable, you're doing the exact same thing you've done all season long and have been trained to do with that play. But the offense looks at what you're doing and has no idea what's coming. There are no tendencies to know who's coming, where they're coming from, and it allows you to have an excellent blitz package, which again pairs really nicely with everything we said about the coverage structure, being able to get into a variety of maybe cover 4 spot drop blitzes or cover 3 fire zones, and provide some of that aggressive blitzing element that some of these other Fangio systems are missing. So it all ties in really, really nicely together. There's a reason that it's working. All of these defenses, I would say, had success and or overperformed last year. Miami's defense had fallen apart. They were still roughly a top 20 unit. The Titans were, about 20th to 22nd, depending on where you look last year defensively. Pretty impressive considering what they had to work with. The Seahawks defense really came on late. The Ravens have obviously been doing their thing. The Chargers defense was somehow like top 10. All of these systems are working, and it's for all of the reasons we just described. So to be kind of at the forefront of this system, to have a defensive coach that was right there at the kind of precipice of this system that is really overtaking the league with a Denard Wilson, that is a major asset for the Titans. And again, if they continue to get better here, I could see Denard Wilson becoming a head coach candidate. And then because I get pretty fired up about this system talk, there is actually one more note that the teams in this system have done that is really important, that even if I didn't fit into that conversation we just had, it is worth noting and is another reason that this system has had success. So a big problem teams face when they come out in cover 4 nickel defense is run defense, right? We talked about that with the Saints and Brandon Staley. Well, this system really discovered, whether it was by accident or intentionally, that you can use 3 safety packages with someone like a Kyle Hamilton, stick that player in the nickel, and get pretty good coverage out of that spot, but significantly better run support and screen support and outside zone support from a bigger bodied third safety in a 3 safety base nickel type of package. kind of the old Cam Chancellor philosophy, except for you're taking the nickel corner off of the field, putting that big safety down towards the box, and then bringing in an extra safety to still play over the top in your quarters heavy structures. And again, that started with Kyle Hamilton, but we have now seen Derwin James do it with the Chargers, have a ton of success in that role. We also saw in this draft, the Seattle Seahawks drafted a 220-pound Nicky Manwari, and the Tennessee Titans here drafted Kevin Winston Jr. In the third round at 215 pounds. And that is just really important to know that is another thing that teams in this system are doing that is basically the reason that this tree is having more success than all of the Vic Fangio disciples, if that makes sense. And I think is going to heavily come into play once we get to the defensive back conversation and get to talk about guys like Kevin Winston. So definitely needed to mention that as well as kind of a third reason why this system is working. But now that we've gone through the offseason, set the table with the coaching staff and what the scheme's going to look like, let's get into the roster breakdown, starting with the quarterback position and rookie QB Cam Ward. And it's always a little awkward coming fresh off of 5 months of draft content and really diving in and nitpicking the crap out of a prospect like Cam Ward, who was the number 1 pick in the draft. It's awkward to come right out of draft season and then hop back into a deep dive series and then rehash all of the same points that so many of you have heard me talking about for so long at this point. And I am going to talk about Cam Ward here, but I do want to keep it a little bit shorter and defer you as well to my film breakdown I did on Cam Ward back in December, where my thoughts really haven't changed over the last 5 months about Cam Ward. And when I made that video, my takeaway was I really like him. And at the time, not a ton of people were on the Cam Ward train. Shedeur was the projected number 1 pick in the draft and the consensus QB1. And I did Cam Ward and Shedeur within a week or two of each other. And my immediate takeaway was, yeah, Cam Ward is worth the number 1 pick. It's maybe not ideal for some of his weaknesses that we can talk about, but he at least has the playmaking, the traits, the pocket presence, especially the ability to mitigate the rush and navigate pressure naturally as the pocket breaks down while keeping his eyes downfield in an effort to extend plays, not just out of the pocket where he's spectacular, but inside the pocket as well. Those plays where the right tackle gets beat, but he senses it and steps up, buys that angle for the right tackle, and just calmly resets, plays within structure, and isn't fazed by that. You don't see that in a ton of young quarterbacks. In the case of Will Levis, who I did like, by the way, unfortunately, I liked Will Levis as a prospect, but his defining weakness was the lack of that pocket presence. So in that sense, he couldn't be any different from Will Levis, and I do think that pocket presence raises the floor of a young quarterback like a Cam Ward. But because of that and some of the throws he makes on the run, some of the scrambling ability, he kind of has that Patrick Mahomes trait where he's somehow just always faster than the guy chasing him. Even if he might have come out and run a 4.7, he still just has that game feel and the awareness to be such a savvy scrambler in that sense. And then he's underrated, and I certainly felt that when I did my initial film studies on him. He's not just this playmaking scrambler. He's incredible at those things, but I thought he was pretty good as a processor, as someone that can thread tight window throws over the middle of the field and throw with anticipation and understand coverage structures and work through progressions and make like really high leverage NFL throws. He's not out there doing it at an elite level, but there's a lot of those on film that really got me excited about Cam Ward and the way he sees the field. You also love the year-to-year progression that he has shown. I think what we've really learned is that to see quarterbacks that really get better year after year after year, that is a piece of evidence that really has shown to matter for these guys. The Joe Burrows, the Jaden Daniels, even Bo Nix, Michael Penix, these guys that really had to hone their craft, maybe take advantage of an extra year of COVID eligibility and the new transfer rules, and just really come out maybe not come out polished, but at least prove that they have that gamer mentality, that they are going to be the first one in, last one out, that they're going to watch film, work at their weaknesses, get better year in, year out. That really shows with someone like Cam Ward, and that might be my favorite trait about his. Now, there's some weaknesses, right? Like, he's not the most accurate passer for a number 1 overall pick. The deep accuracy, some of the sails over the middle of the field, they just happen a little bit more often than you'd like to see there. What you always hear about Cam Ward, the over-aggressive kind of YOLO balls, they are there. There are plays that he doesn't want to let die. And then it ties into my next point on him, where he has a good, not great arm, but there are times when he gets into those playmaking opportunities, he attempts throws that he thinks he can make, but his arm just cannot cash. And you really want him to get a better understanding of, like, what is the range of your aggressiveness with your arm? Because maybe trying to throw the ball back 25 yards across your body against the Cal defense is a throw that you can't make accurately. So you want to see him really learn those things. There's a lot of Jordan Love to his game as a processor and decision maker, and some people hear that and think it's a bad thing. I think Jordan Love has very underrated processing in terms of making high leverage throws, throwing with anticipation, making some really impressive reads on the run and inside the pocket, like we said with Cam Ward. But there is the bad side of Jordan Love, where he throws the ball right to the safety because he was trying to maybe guess what the coverage was going to be, and he didn't maybe have that stopping mechanism in his brain that says, no, you can't make that throw. And then some of the YOLO throws on the run as well. You remember Jordan Love in the divisional round playoffs against the Niners, where he throws it back across the middle of the field in a pick in a game-winning situation. There is some of that with Cam Ward, and there's variance to it, right? You want some of the aggressiveness in there. You want that confidence, that confident processor that he has. You don't want that to go anywhere, but you do need to see him reel some things in terms of some of the turnover-worthy plays and that sort of stuff. But ultimately, I do think the Titans made a good decision taking him with the number 1 pick. Even if he has more weaknesses than your typical number 1 overall QB, the strengths would suggest that if he hits, he absolutely has the upside to return what you're looking for in that sort of pick. And that is, if you look at my QB tiers, and I'm going to post all of the descriptions for these QB tiers in the description down below, Cam Ward has the upside to be a tier 2 or better quarterback. The or better would be to be an elite guy, to literally just be one of these rare guys, your Josh Allens and Mahomes and Joe Burrows, where you're just transcendent elite quarterback. With his development year to year, with his high-end traits, with his pocket presence, there's a world where that happens. But I think more likely there's a world where he is a tier 2 great quarterback, and that is someone you expect over time to win a Super Bowl with. That's all best case scenario. He's far from a given, right? He comes in to this NFL season, his rookie season, for me ranked as the 27th quarterback in the league, with kind of tempered expectations for a young guy coming in. Rookie QBs, they don't all play like Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow out the gate, right? Like, it could take a little bit of time to get there, and maybe he never will, but excited to see him play. I do think the Titans made the right pick, and he's obviously expected and will be this team's starter out the gate, and we're going to get to see where this goes. So there's your Cam Ward breakdown. We can spend a minute on Will Levis. For him, it's just the processing never came along in 2 years, and the pocket presence and lack thereof really was detrimental to him, especially behind a bad offensive line. He just never was able to get comfortable back there. And unlike I think a Cam Ward is going to be able to be, even though I think their offensive line will be better for Ward, Ward's a guy that if the tackle gets beat, he can, sense where to step in the pocket and still stay within his progression while doing so. Will Levis might walk into that pressure or panic against that pressure and not know how to sense that space and use his feet. It was a real crippling factor for him, just walking into sacks, taking bad sacks, not knowing how to get out of pressure. Like, that paired with the lack of processing really has been the nail in his coffin for now. Still a crazy arm. Crazy quick release. And you hope for the kid to come in now as a backup, and maybe he's a guy that 2 years from now gets another opportunity and could have a Geno Smith, Sam Darnold-esque resurgence. That's a dream down the road, but that's not something in play for the Titans here or anything you're expecting out of Will Levis. And then behind him, they did sign some kind of journeyman veteran types, Brandon Allen and Tim Boyle. But yeah, your 27th ranked quarterback room there. Not bad for a rookie coming in. Could be better, but certainly could be worse. And I can't wait to see him play, man. But let's talk about who Cam Ward is going to get to throw the football to here. And unfortunately, this is not the best group of weapons. They rank 27th to 29th for me in the NFL with a C+ grade. So it's not like a horrible group. A C+ grade is still respectable for what it's worth, but we're in a league that is loaded with deep weapons and teams trying to give their QBs everything they can have to succeed. That's probably not the case in Tennessee. This is more of just an adequate group with some exciting young pieces that you're hoping can come along and raise this ranking in time. But you do at least have Calvin Ridley, who I think in a best case scenario would not be a number one wide receiver because he's inconsistent. He seems a little streaky to me at times, and he just isn't the most reliable hands player. Like, he has a very high drop rate, and his contested catch trustworthiness, if you will, or just his contested catch rate straight up, is all over the place, man. Like, he is a more slender player, but he goes on runs where that's kind of what part of what makes him frustrating is he goes on runs where he's like mossing DBs and like making really tough catches that you don't even really know how he came down with. And then there's other points where it's like he's not high pointing the ball, he's not getting his feet in towards the sideline, he's like doesn't have like I think he has good body control, but he doesn't have the sideline awareness to get his feet in at times. So like there's just these frustrating ball skills moments with Calvin Ridley that I think hold him back from being a legitimate true number one wide receiver. But at least in terms of how you can use him, being a receiver that can threaten to all three levels of the defense and be a speed threat that can take the top off the defense, he is a number one receiver in the sense of how many different ways you can use him. So you do at least have that in Calvin Ridley. And for what it's worth, he really settled in the second half of last season with, a lot of Mason Rudolph in there, but he really played, I mean, certainly his best football since the gambling suspension, but maybe even since before then. And if he can just pick up where he left off, he could actually climb in the rankings a little bit. And I would never say he's going to ascend and be a true alpha number one wide receiver, but can he be someone that you feel good enough about becoming the best receiver on your team if you put the right pieces next to him, if that makes sense? Yeah, I think even like if he plays like he did in the second half of last season, that's how I would categorize Calvin Ridley. And then if some of these other young pieces really come along, you could actually be in a pretty good spot. But with where we're at right now, it's like, well, we could do worse than Calvin Ridley as our number one wide receiver, but we could also certainly do better. But he's a nice piece to have here for sure, and is the absolute key contributor to this still being a pretty adequate group with a C+ overall grade for weapons, because after him, they are searching for answers. They bring in Tyler Lockett, now 32 years old, who showed clear physical regression, in my opinion. I mean, it is also funny that this is the Titans bringing him in. The more things change, the more things stay the same. A new GM, a new coach, it doesn't matter. This is still going to be the team that brings in the 32-year-old wide receiver that everybody thinks is kind of washed up. It hasn't really ever worked for the Titans, whether that was Julio Jones or Andre Johnson or DeAndre Hopkins, Randy Moss, right? Like the list goes on and on and on. To expect too much from Tyler Lockett other than like maybe something close to what they got from Tyler Boyd last year, which is like 500, 600 yards, a reliable short to intermediate weapon that's going to be in the right place at the right time. That's kind of the best case scenario for Tyler Lockett at this point. Worst case scenario is he's a non-factor, that he's even further slowed down from the regression he showed last season, that he is more of an issue for you than he is a contributor. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility that this is just a bad signing. I'm not predicting that that's going to be the case. I do think he can be a useful kind of 3B type of target within your offense. But right now, like heading into the year, he's kind of your number 2. So that's a huge problem, right? That's the core reason of why this is the 27th to 29th group of weapons. But then after Tyler Lockett, it is exciting. Like, I liked the pieces they brought in with these young receivers, and they all kind of play their role. And you spend a lot of time talking about trying to build out a group of complementary skill sets. These 3 rookies literally check all of the boxes in the 3 different archetypes that you're looking to build a wide receiving core out of. And for that reason, if 3 years from now, if all these guys hit and these are your 3 starters and this is a really well-crafted complementary group of weapons, that wouldn't be the biggest surprise. Now, these guys all have to hit before you get there, but I think the process of acquiring these guys and acknowledging their skill sets and how they can help this offense individually and separately was really smart. And the first investment here was Shamari DK. And with Ridley being the kind of de facto number 1 and Tyler Lockett being kind of a slot, short to intermediate type of operator, I do think Shamari DK as a true designated deep threat role is going to have the fastest path to legitimate playing time for this Titans team in their rookie season. Cam Ward does have a headhunter's mentality, and I do think they're going to want to take some design deep shots. And that is exactly what DK brings to the table. He has legit 4.3 speed. He tracks the ball well. So many of these deep threats have drop issues, and DK had adequate hands as a deep threat, but there were a lot of deep threats that had a lot worse hands than him and have over time. So I do think he can be a relatively consistent vertical threat. And, he played a very simplified role in Florida's passing game, running deep crossers and shot plays. But I do think when he ran out routes and digs, he showed some flashes of good route running. So I don't think it's that he just has to be just stuck as a designated deep threat role, like be a Marquez Valdes-Scantling only type of wide receiver. But at least early, that's what he's good at, and that's how they're going to use him. And the production of these types of players, obviously you got to catch the ball. But for the most part, these guys are able to get open deep. It's just their production and their development and ability to make it in the league is arguably much more tied to the play calling and designing these deep shots at the right time, the quarterback hitting these throws accurately, giving you range to run underneath these throws and really lean into your speed. And then, of course, the protection, buying time to hit those deep shots. So his success is just as critical or dependent on the other factors of this team than his own success. But, hitting the jugs machine, getting better at your routes, and learning how to beat press, that's all stuff he can absolutely get better at. Now, I will just quickly talk about Van Jefferson because it piggybacks off of this deep threat role in this offense really well. I do think that's why they signed Van Jefferson. That's kind of what he's been for the last couple of years, is just a design deep threat type of guy. Has not been good in that role. But getting DK in the top of the 4th round there, I would like to think that a young team, they're going to just go with DK in that role, which is going to be a limited role anyway. And Jefferson will then be competing for a roster spot as a 1-year, $1.2 million veteran minimum signing. Right now, Jefferson is listed as the starter on Our Lads because they're going to make DK take that job. I'm going to bet on DK to take that job. And that's why I put him up there with the 5 starters in this group of weapons. But there are 2 other rookies that we really got to talk about here. So you have their other 4th round pick, Alec Iomanner. And I was a big fan of Iomanner. It does sound like he fell to the 4th round because of some late medical flags that popped up. Whereas the Titans feel like they may have gotten a starting X wide receiver in the 4th round if he can stay healthy. So we'll see how that plays out. I do feel like us in the draft world, we dismiss these players that fall for medical reasons and just cement them as steals. Whereas there is a record of guys like this that we like. We liked their college tape, but NFL doctors were afraid of their durability. They get to the league and can't stay healthy. So there could be something there. But a fully healthy Alec Iomanner is a full-sized, 6'1", 210-pound receiver with good speed. He did come out and run in the 4.4s, which I don't think shows in his route running necessarily, but it does show after the catch. He is one of these guys, kind of like a Michael Pittman or a Deebo Samuel, where he kind of has a second gear with the ball in his hands. So I like that about him. He's a different player than those two guys, but a similar trait there in that sense. And then he's got really quick feet as well. He can beat press. He can snap off routes. The main thing for him is just becoming more physical at the catch point more consistently. He has dominant catches on tape, and then he has other times where he kind of fights the ball or lets DBs hand fight with him and disrupt him either at the catch point or within his routes. But, I had him certainly as a day 2 prospect, and if healthy, was a steal. And someone that I would not be the least bit surprised if he kind of overtakes Tyler Lockett's role as the number 2 wide receiver, because his skill set actually plays really nicely with Calvin Ridley and a Shamari DK, or even with Calvin Ridley and Xavier Restrepo. Or in time, Ridley's out of the picture and it's DK, Iomanner, and Restrepo in the slot. We'll get to Restrepo in a second, but definitely a player running digs, comebackers, out routes, slants. That kind of typical X wide receiver role could absolutely be Alec Iomanner's job to be had in time. And definitely someone I've been ending up with, by the way, in my kind of dynasty drafts, if you guys still have rookie drafts or dynasty startups going on. But from a real fantasy football angle, probably not getting too much from him in year 1 because Tyler Lockett is here. And Iomanner still has some room to grow as well. But then you have Xavier Restrepo, who ends up going undrafted. The league terrified of a 4.8 40 that he runs at his pro day. A bizarre situation. You note it, you ding him for it slightly. But to take a guy that, in my opinion, was a day 2 wide receiver prospect, a slot-only wide receiver, granted, but a day 2 slot wide receiver prospect, and just not draft the guy because of a 40 time. Look, we have GPS tracking. He's still hitting 17, 18 mile an hour routes over the middle of the field, which is not burning, but that is plenty to get separation. You don't watch the tape and say, oh my God, he's so slow. Like, you do see him pull away on crossing routes, and he's super savvy as a route runner. Like, he's got those subtle push-offs that never get called. He's always in the right place at the right time. He's got, he's tough as shit in terms of catching, tough balls over the middle, knowing he's going to get hit after the catch. Part of the benefit of him kind of being bigger and slower is he does break tackles and can run block his ass off. So to go undrafted is silly, but what a perfect landing spot to really not view him like a normal undrafted free agent. He, to me, is a lock to make this team. And then you, of course, have to mention this is Cam Ward's guy, dude. Like, when Cam Ward would get into scramble drill, Xavier Restrepo is the guy that knew where Cam Ward was looking. He had that sort of Travis Kelce to Mahomes chemistry at the college level, where they made a lot of magic happen in scramble drills. So if Tyler Lockett gets hurt, I really think Xavier Restrepo is your plug-in slot wide receiver. I do. And he might get that job and never look back. He's never going to be a superstar. I guess never say never, but I feel pretty good about saying that. But could he be a year in, year out, 70 catch, 800 yard type of weapon as a starting slot in this group? That's a great locker room presence and the definition of reliability. 100%. So one of the best undrafted pickup free agents, frankly, I ever remember. And there's a reason he's listed up here ahead of some other veterans in my mind. But there are some other names, like Treylon Burks is still here. And Burks has obviously had drop issues. He's had major issues staying healthy, taking care of his body. Like, probably just doesn't have it at this point. There's still some exciting flashes in there. I kind of like this setup for him where it's like, hey, come take Van Jefferson's job. Can you beat out Van Jefferson for the wide receiver 6 spot? If not, see ya. Could be a fascinating name if it gets released, if he ends up in the hands of like a Kyle Shanahan or something like that as a Deebo Samuel replacement. But that's literally neither here nor there. So there's Treylon Burks. They still have Jaquan Jackson, who was a rookie last year. I thought was a good value when they got him. This room's getting a little bit crowded for him, but he is going to be in the mix for their return man job, I think, which is wide open. So that could play into his benefit to making this team. I'm not ready to quit Jaquan Jackson. I thought he was a nice, potential wide receiver 4 type. So we'll see what happens with him. They also brought in James Prochet. Like I mentioned, they don't have a returner on the roster right now. That's Prochet's job. So it's a very crowded room. But the primary focus here is on what these young guys are going to do for you. But then you do have an interesting tight end room to talk about here too. So Chig Okonkwo is heading into the last year of his rookie contract. He's just been really inconsistent since some really exciting flashes in his rookie season. He's probably at this point stuck in that tweener tag where he just doesn't have the size to be a true inline tight end. I think that's really spoken to with the Gunnar Helm draft pick here. I still like a lot of the stuff he does. And he's a guy that, like, I look at Coach Callahan and I'm like, get this guy involved. Like, he's nasty after the catch. He's a mismatch problem. You don't even need to make him a full-time starter. But we did see at the end, like the ass end of the season, Chig started to get peppered with targets, and he had some monster games at the very end of the season. So, I still want to believe in Chig Okonkwo, but at this point, he is probably one of these tweener tight ends that, the Mike Gesicki's and Noah Fants, where it's just kind of hard for these guys to really break through and find that consistency in their game. But you can still do some really fun stuff with him as a slot wide receiver, as a fullback, as a 12 personnel tight end, at times as an inline player. But he's in the mix as a 4th or 5th target that can cause some problems for a defense. Quietly found out this offseason he's a huge RuneScape fan, by the way, which shout out to the RuneScape fans out there. Back to 5th grade TFG is reminiscing with Chig Okonkwo tweeting about RuneScape every month. But they got some other names in this tight end room. Week 1, I still think Josh Wiley's probably the number 2 tight end, but he better be holding on to that job with a tight grip, because I think Gunnar Helm is just the much better tight end prospect compared to Josh Wiley, who still kind of is a prospect despite being in the league for a couple years here. Wiley is just kind of an awkward player where he's a little bit too tall to be a great blocker. He's a little bit stiff to be this great route runner or dynamic run after catch threat. He does have speed though, and he's had some fun moments in just random one-off games. So I don't want to just completely write off Josh Wiley, but I do look at Gunnar Helm as just a much more practical possession, potential starting tight end for this team. Very much in your sort of Cole Kmet, Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper line of tight ends. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but blocks, catches everything, is savvy to sit down in zones, can do a little bit after the catch, just your prototype Y tight end. I saw that, like every bit of that in Gunnar Helm. Really thought his football IQ and ball skills impressed me. He just isn't a great athlete, right? So I do anticipate as the year goes on, he's going to become their sort of starting inline tight end and basically split time with Chig Okonkwo. And then depending on how good Chig plays, we could be heading into 2026 where this is just Gunnar Helm's tight end room. And he is kind of broken through as the clear-cut starting tight end. And I would say that's frankly more likely than not. Not a guarantee for a 4th round pick, but a really nice value for where they got him. And definitely someone to be moderately excited about, playing a quality role as a starting caliber player on this team in time for the Titans. But like any young tight end, he still has to prove it and probably develop a little bit as a run blocker. Drops off after that. It's kind of undrafted developmental types in that tight end room. But then maybe the second nicest thing that the Titans have in this group of weapons, and is another thing kind of contributing to this just being an overall adequate group, is arguably the best receiving tandem of backs in the league. There are better one-off receiving backs, but to have both Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard is really fun. And, they can use these guys in any number of ways, but they can really just kind of rotate drives if they want, because these guys are very similar. Keep them fresh and get the most out of these guys, where it's not a very predictable nature that one guy's coming in to do one thing over another. They are slightly different just in terms of really getting into the nitty gritty of it, but overall both are very good receiving backs. Pollard's a little more polarizing, pun unintended there, but Pollard's like one of the best route running receiving backs in the league. He can actually play wide receiver, run good routes, and get open as a wide receiver flexed out. And he can make like really impressive catches at times, like through traffic. But he had like 8 drops last season and just has really bad pass blocking. So like really inconsistent in some of the important phases to really emerge as an elite receiving threat. But his high-end plays are up there for the best receiving backs in the league. Whereas Tyjae Spears is much more of your just reliable, stable dump down threat and screen threat. But good contact balance, really reliable hands. I think his high-end pass blocking reps surprise you at times. But yeah, really nice duo of pass catching backs that Cam Ward got really good at utilizing his checkdowns in his final season. And I would expect both Pollard and Spears, assuming they're both healthy, will both probably catch 50 passes or so here. So really nice duo there. And then Chestnut and Mullings are more like power backs. So not expecting many targets for them at all. But that completes your breakdown on this group of weapons. A group that I don't think is going to prevent Cam Ward from playing well as a rookie, but it's just not an ideal group, and you're really hoping for a best case scenario out of a lot of these young players. And in the case of Tyler Lockett and Ridley as well, right? Like Ridley's been a little bit streaky. You want to get second half of the year Ridley, not first half of the year Ridley. And Lockett, it's like he could be a nothing burger or he could be a adequate number 2 piece for you. So there's definitely a lot of question marks with this group. But let's move on and talk about the backfield with more of a focus on the run game here. And the Titans actually come in with the exact same ranking I had on the Saints for our last deep dive, with a B- grade, ranking 18th to 19th at running back. A very stable backfield that's going to allow this run game to do what they want to do. Raise the floor, set the floor, whichever term you want to go with there, but just allow this offense to do what they want to do on the ground, pending the play calling and the blocking is in place for a good run game, right? But there's kind of a simplistic beauty about this running back duo here with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. They have their differences, but for the most part, they're balanced, explosive backs that here, like, it's a pretty easy, clean split where Tony Pollard's a little bit better, a little bit more of a power element. He's going to get 2/3 of the touches. And then Tyjae Spears is going to come in for a drive here, a drive there. Or if Tony Pollard rips off 4 straight runs, you can bring in Tyjae Spears. And I just love that you don't have a predictability element where, okay, this back's in the game, therefore we know what's coming. They don't have that in Tennessee. You can really do whatever you want with either of these backs, whether it's run inside zone, outside zone, gap, run out of shotgun, pass the ball, like whatever. Both these guys can handle it, So there's an element of beauty to this duo. But just to spend a little bit more time on these guys individually, because there are some differences. When I think of Tony Pollard, I do think of his high-end kind of speed train runs. When he gets rolling, he's a really tough guy to get down on the ground. Runs through arm tackles at the second level, has a stiff arm, like an underrated stiff arm too. So like he definitely has a little bit more of a power element than someone like Tyjae Spears. I think you could argue his vision's not quite as good as Tyjae Spears. I don't think Pollard has bad vision, but there are definitely some runs on tape where there's added steps and he's getting to the hole maybe a half a step later than he should, or because he falls steps, he's not able to get up to that speed train running style all the time. And I do think that leads to some inconsistent moments in his overall production and kind of what's holding him back from being like a superstar running back, but a really good starter across the board. You feel very comfortable with him as your lead back. And then this is kind of the ideal spot for Tyjae Spears, who I loved coming out of the draft. From a pure raw grade, if you took positional value out of it, I think Tyjae Spears was a top 50 overall player in that draft for me, but he did have very major concerns about durability, and we've seen that stack up a little bit in the pros. So for kind of a mid-round running back with a lot of talent and durability concerns, I love this as a spot for him where they kind of treat him like a starter for everything we said about, like, when he goes in, they don't treat him any different than Tony Pollard, right? They will ask the full workload out of him, or if Pollard's out for a week, they will just treat him as a starter. But because you have Tony Pollard there, you're limiting his hits and exposure to injury so that you can hopefully keep him healthy. But Spears is a little bit different. He's got a little bit more stop-start ability than a guy like Tony Pollard. Not that Pollard doesn't have agility and ability to make you miss, but Spears really has a nice jump cut. If you go inside zone, he's got really nice patience and can change lanes really well. So a little bit of a different style, but overall, really good pair of runners. I think you want to talk about fantasy football always with these running backs. I don't consider myself higher or lower on either of these two backs. I think Pollard as an RB2 for fantasy is perfectly reasonable, should have a nice season. He got 1,000 yards last year. The offense should be better this year, and I expect a similar performance. Whereas Tyjae Spears, probably more of a handcuff, or a very deep league, you might want Tyjae Spears for a week here, a week there. He's going to be one of the better RB2s in the league, but only so many times those guys end up getting drafted in fantasy football. So it kind of depends on your league there. Or if you're doing your best ball drafts on Underdog, which you guys, if you're not playing best ball, I love it. It's a great opportunity to kind of like practice for your home leagues, because you can do just $1 drafts, and yeah, if you win money from it, that's great. But essentially they're mock drafts, whereas the mock draft simulators on all the other platforms, you end up just with half the people dipping out because there's nothing on the line. Whereas on Underdog, people actually stay in there and draft through the end, so you can see if certain sleepers come off the board, when you got to draft certain guys. It's a great exercise that gives you a chance at winning some money, but it's also just fun and gives you that chance to scratch that itch or take a chance to get certain players that you want to have in some fantasy formats. So definitely Underdog is a great place to play fantasy football and support this channel. If you want to sign up using code TFG, they will give you a bonus match when you sign up. But yeah, like a last round flyer on Tyjae Spears, because if Tony Pollard did get hurt, even just an individual week, you could get some really big weeks out of someone like Tyjae Spears. But beyond those two, it's quite clear to me that they just want a big back to back these guys up for goal line, because neither of these guys are real goal line short yardage threats. So it makes sense that you would have Julius Chestnut. You bring in Khalil Mullings as a 6th rounder who's a north and south short yardage / goal line threat. A bunch of touchdowns for Michigan last year. Is a really good short yardage back. So either both those guys make it, or you just keep one. They're pretty similar types of backs for that short yardage role. And then we can quickly mention the QB run multiplier that we apply to these teams, how much the threat of the designed QB run game boosts the overall run game. Hard to know exactly how much they will tap into this. Callahan doesn't have this extensive history of drawing up QB runs, but it is something you can do with Cam Ward, and I would expect they would run some read options. He's got good vision and contact balance, decent size, savviness to pick up first downs. So, I don't think this is going to be Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson getting 4 or 5 carries a game, but certainly mixing in 20 designed runs or so to keep defenses on their feet would be smart and elevate this offense a little bit. But let's go ahead and talk about who is blocking for all of this talent. This was a brutal offensive line last year, and they're hoping it won't be a brutal offensive line this year. There's potential for this to even be a good offensive line. I don't think they're there yet. But they come out ranking 26th to 27th for overall offensive line rankings. Much better for pass blocking, though. That's the key here. 17th to 22nd in the league for pass blocking, which when they were no better than 30th last year, I think Titans fans would absolutely take that if that's kind of their floor here. Whereas the run blocking, I don't know if they're quite where they need to be in terms of moving defenses off the line. But to go through this left to right, they will now be starting Dan Moore at left tackle, and J.C. Latham, their rookie left tackle last year, top 10 draft pick, is going to slide over to right tackle. And Dan Moore Jr., his name could not be any more perfect for who he is as a player, the most generic, lame name you could think of. And he is the most generic, lame, baseline starting NPC tackle out there. He has played a million games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Feels like he's been the exact same player, plus or minus 2% any given season in terms of efficiency. An adequate athlete, adequate size, adequate strength and technique, like adequate efficiency, and hits the open market because the Steelers thought they could do better. And there were no tackles on the market this year. And the Titans obviously were taking Cam Ward in the first round, had to do something. They give him $20 million a year for a guy that's probably a $10 million a year player. And honestly, I don't even hate it because you saw what happened with Nicholas Petit-Frere and how bad that was last year. And it was even worse when some of these other guys had to step in. One man's trash can be another man's treasure. And in this case, Dan Moore just not being a complete turnstile, even if he does have some ugly weeks where, you know, great athletes can get the best of him, to not be Nicholas Petit-Frere or John Ojukwu is a massive upgrade worth the $20 million for the Titans. So I fully understand why they did it because, yeah, you can look at it in a vacuum and be like, that's a horrible free agent signing. That guy's worth half of that price. But then you can take a step back and say, well, what else were they to do? There just weren't answers. So he's going to be your left tackle. And then let's continue going left to right here. You got Peter Skoronski at left guard, who, you know, I've been suspect of this idea that he's a guard for the Titans. I think you could even to this day make an argument that the better team building philosophy would have been to play Peter Skoronski at left tackle and sign a guard, but guards are expensive these days too. But anyway, they're adamant on keeping him at guard, even though he was a tackle in college. But at least in the second half of last season, or even the last 2/3 of last season, the Titans were at least justified, or they justified to us that they want him as a guard because he was the best pass protecting guard in the entire NFL from like week 6 on. If you look at PFF pass blocking efficiency, everything that made him a great tackle did finally translate to dominant pass blocking tape as a guard. And that's where like all the Joe Thuney comps kind of started to come through last season. And you assume that that's who he is now. If it is, you are talking about an absolute rock solid interior protector in Peter Skoronski. I think he's adjusted to the play strength aspect. He wasn't getting pushed back like he was in his rookie season. He's adjusted his footwork. His hands are fantastic. He varies his techniques. From a pass blocking perspective, I don't have a single bad word to say about who he's going to be as a left guard. I do think some of the lack of the athleticism, the ability to get off the ball and move people in the run game, it's certainly not there yet. I think the strides he made from year 1 to year 2 were impressive. And if the run blocking comes along, that's great. But even like a Joe Thuney has never been a great run blocker, right? He's been an okay run blocker, which Skoronski's awareness and effort still make him an adequate run blocker. But is he an impact in that phase of the game? Not to this point. We'll see if that can come along though. But definitely think the up arrow belongs on him. And is there a world where we're looking back on the 2025 season and we say Peter Skoronski is the best guard in football? I think it's on the table. I really do. Especially because that's a debate that's pretty open right now. So I've really come along on him as your left guard. And then you have Lloyd Cushenberry, who missed most of last season. I debated whether or not to put the injury concern logo on him on the screen here. Because 2 of the last 3 seasons, in 2022 and 2024, he missed a half of the season. So it's starting to become a concern. You hope that's just a fluke, because in 2023, he played the entire year for Denver and earned this huge contract in Tennessee. He's a good player when healthy, though he wasn't much of an impact when he got out there last year, but, he had bad guard play on his right side. Even early in the year when Cushenberry was healthy, Skoronski wasn't quite playing up to that level that he did for the second 2/3 of the season. So excited to see Cushenberry now get dropped into Skoronski now that he's really figured it out, and those two guys could really play off of each other well. But if healthy, I think you feel really good about what Lloyd Cushenberry is as a good pass protector, a pretty solid run blocker that has gotten really better every year of his career other than last year. And him returning from injury should help in making this a better offensive line than what they had last year. And then the other major upgrade that this team made is getting Kevin Zeitler at right guard. Now, 35 years old, he's up against the clock, but he's still been doing it for the last 3 years. Had another monster year for Detroit last year. Took a step back in terms of his pass blocking efficiency, but getting to play next to Penei Sewell and Frank Ragnow, he did have a career year in terms of the run blocking grade. I think that's assisted a little bit by being on the best run blocking line in football. I don't see some tremendous athlete that's a great run blocker on tape necessarily, but he is a good, strong, smart player in both phases. Some of the lack of athleticism at his age will get him at times in certain matchups. He's not a perfect player, but a massive upgrade from what they were working with in Dylan Radins there last year. You hope at his age he can stay healthy and be out there. Zeitler wasn't able to give it a go for the Lions on their playoff run last year. He was $9 million 1-year contract for a reason. There is always going to be risk attached to signing a 35-year-old offensive lineman, but I think he's shown he can at least give you quality starting guard play for the season. In time, they're going to need an answer, though, because in a second we're going to talk about their depth. There's just not really any depth here, and if he is getting banged up, you get into worry territory pretty damn quickly with this offensive line, and that's where you're really hoping that Bill Callahan can do his job and get these depth pieces to develop. And that's a nice transition to our last starter here in J.C. Latham, who you're absolutely hoping can continue to develop and reach further heights, I suppose. I was really hard on the J.C. Latham pick. I thought it was a massive reach, that there were other tackles like Fashanu and Fatanu, who ended up missing his rookie season, that the Titans should have picked. And time will tell how that take will age. But I will give Latham and the Titans credit. Latham was better than I expected him to be in his rookie season, where I thought he was going to be a liability for the Titans. Some of the losses he had at Alabama, the slow feet, moving him to left tackle, I was legit worried for what that was going to mean for the Titans. And he was fine. He was not great. And he in particular had several performances where I was at least justified to confirm to Titans fans like what I saw at Alabama that had me worried. You watch that first game of the season or the Texans game against Will Anderson, and you're like, shit, yeah, this guy can't move his feet. Like, his feet are glued to the ground, and the guys are just running around him. You could at least see in those individual games why I was worried, but to Latham's credit, those were really 2 key standout games amidst a full season where he was pretty solid. Like, yeah, he had his losses at times, but was very much like an average playable left tackle. And then you're now sliding him to right tackle, where he may or may not be more natural, but it's the same conversation we had about Fuanga for the Saints, who's sliding from left tackle to right tackle. Fuanga was like comparable and okay rookie left tackle in terms of pass protection, but now you move him to right tackle, you're comparing him to other right tackles in the league, his bar gets raised up because there's a whole bunch of high-end borderline elite pass protecting left tackles in the league, Well, you move him to right tackle, and it's that list is much shorter. So I do like him at the right side even better, and I like that move as well. I think long term, you'll be happy to have him as your right tackle, and that kind of helps justify the Dan Moore signing even more. If the idea was we got to get Latham to right tackle because that's his best position long term, I agree with that thinking. And we talk about Latham with James Foster, so I don't want to spoil everything here. You can definitely stick around for even more JC Latham analysis. But I do think there's room for the arrow to be pointing up from a pass protector, as with any young tackle. Really where I do still want to see more from Latham, and I thought it was lacking in college. I thought it was lacking in his rookie season here. Still want to see more of a mean streak in the run game. And I think coaching and confidence is 80% of the picture there. So there's hope, right? Like there are plays where he connects and he can absolutely take guys out of the run game. But there's a lot more plays where he's a little bit slow off the ball. He's not really hitting and punching and bringing that mean streak as a run blocker that you want to see. And he falls off of blocks as well, because I think he can struggle to stay balanced at that point of contact. So despite his size, he's not as good of a run blocker as you would think. And I would love to see some improvements in that phase. But that rounds out your starters. And unlike last year, you don't look at this group and say, there's a weak link. There's some question marks, but it does not compare to the question marks you had for this group heading in to last season. Honestly, where I'm worried about the offensive line would be the depth. I think it's like it's an average of 3 teams per year get through the season with 95% snaps played from their 5 starting offensive linemen. The probability that you have to get into your offensive line depth is tremendously high, and the Titans do have noticeably poor offensive line depth. At tackle, it's all developmental projects. John Ojukwu, Jalen Duncan, Crenshaw Dixon, an undrafted pickup. Oli Udoh has played a bunch, but has been a complete problem as a pass protector. You have no tackle that you feel good about stepping in. And then at guard, like, I think Blake Hance is an okay run blocker, and Callahan's familiar with him. He played as a rookie a little bit in Cleveland with Bill Callahan, but as a pass protector, he's struggled. And then you got Brendan Hamas is a developmental guy. Jackson Slater is a interesting 5th round developmental pick out of Sacramento State. A good dart throw to make, but that's going to come down to Bill Callahan, developing the young kid out of a small level of competition. Sam Mustapher, Corey Levlin have played some center if Cushenberry goes down. But the depth, there's just not really anything to write home about outside of some of these guys figuring things out. And then it is also worth noting the Titans were only one of 3 teams that I actually gave a negative run block boost to in the league from their skill players. And I was only going to do that if you, number one, don't have a good player from your skill players as a run blocker, and number 2, if you had at least one liability. And that's the case of the Titans. None of their tight ends, I would say, are adequate run blockers. You're hoping Gunnar Helm can be. And then your wide receivers aren't good run blockers. Like Calvin Ridley is a very poor run blocker. Tyler Lockett's undersized. They don't really have like a fullback element here, other than Chigo Okonkwo as a lead blocker can do some stuff, but much more limited as an inline player. So they get dinged even a little bit further in the run blocking aspect for that. But overall, I think Titans fans and maybe even Cam Ward will take this where the pass blocking is looking like at least solid. The run blocking, you're hoping can get better in the future. But as long as you're doing a better job, buying time and keeping Cam Ward upright, that's progress, which is all any team can ask for on an offensive line. But that rounds out your offensive overview. So they did come in pretty low for the offensive rankings. This is obviously a big part of them ranking 31st as we head into the season. 31st overall for offense. The rookie quarterback, questions at weaponry, questions, frankly, with the coaching, and can Callahan prove that he's a difference maker as a coach? 28th for passing game overall is respectable for a young offense, but 31st for run game. I think they have a lot to prove with the run blocking, and they have a lack of any difference-making aspects on the ground as well. But again, I love to reiterate, these are week 1 rankings. You are absolutely hoping they make progress, and the second half of the year, we're talking about the Titans as like showing promise and maybe being the 23rd best offense. I think that's a perfectly reasonable outlook for this team. But part of the fun thing about this Titans team is it's not just all about Cam Ward and building things up with this, hopefully exciting young offense. I think they are doing some good stuff on the defensive side of things. In fact, I would argue as we start with their defensive line, at least the interior of this group was a walkaway strength of the year 1 of Callahan's regime here with Denard Wilson as the DC, of course, that offers some exciting building blocks for this team. So for the overall defensive line, this is the team's highest ranking unit, coming in as the 17th best defensive line in the league. However, they just might be the most split in the league in the sense that they are actually, for me, tied for third to fourth ranking D-line run defense with an A- grade. However, damn near towards the bottom for pass rush, 26th to 30th for pass rush with a C grade. So they can stop the run, and they have some talent here. But getting after the quarterback is still very much a question for this defensive line, even if there is a lot of good things to say about it. So let's actually start with the interior of this unit. I had to put 3 starters up there because they are going to do everything they can to get, obviously, Jeffrey Simmons on the field, Tavondre Sweat, but also Sebastian Joseph Day out there. Not that the 3 of them will be out there for every single package. Obviously, that's hard to do when a lot of defensive fronts are basing out of a 4-2 style nickel with just a pair of interior defensive players out there. But we will see a lot of, I think, penny fronts, which are 5-1 fronts, the occasional 3-4 base defense as well. And Denard Wilson, along with all of the coaches in this scheme, get very creative with 3-3 odd fronts and just different ways to slant these guys, taking someone like a Jeffrey Simmons and sticking him as a 5 technique as a part of the edge group. Like, they do a lot of different things to get those 3 interior players on the field, and really had to list all 5 of the starters here, whereas for many of these teams we only list 4. But you start things off with Jeffrey Simmons, who is this team's number 1 defensive lineman overall. But I think it's fair to ask if Jeffrey Simmons has stalled just short of being a certified number 1 defensive lineman. There is just a certain tier of your Chris Joneses and Nick Bosa's and Micah Parsons's of guys that are legitimate game wreckers that quite clearly, if they are your best defensive lineman, not only are you happy with that as your best defensive lineman, but kind of that player alone is such a game-wrecking player that I'm not going to say it doesn't matter who else you have around him, but he alone will give you a serviceable pass rush because of his gravity alone and his efficiency alone. Jeffrey Simmons stopped short of that. And at this point, as he turns 28 this season, I'm kind of done expecting him to be that player. In the last 3 seasons, he's averaged about 50 pressures and 6.5 sacks. Those are excellent numbers, but Jeffrey Simmons, if this makes sense, should probably be more of a 1B type of player for your defensive line. And without that 1A and without legitimate number 2s also next to Jeffrey Simmons, you actually end up with a pretty blockable front. And that's why it's kind of a prayer that someone else can really step up here. But I'm not trying to take anything away from Jeffrey Simmons. He's still an absolutely great pass rusher. He's a beast. And unfortunately, because there aren't a lot of, or really any other key factors on this pass rush, you can double team Jeffrey Simmons a lot. But that said, he's not splitting double teams and beating double teams like Chris Jones can, or like Aaron Donald did in his prime, or some of those legitimate alpha number one interior rushers still find ways to beat those double teams in a way that Jeffrey Simmons just can't always do. And even as a one-on-one rusher, I just don't know that he's really evolved too much to dominate one-on-one reps when he does get them. That's another core difference between a Jeffrey Simmons and, say, a Chris Jones. If Chris Jones is lucky enough to get a one-on-one matchup, he's going to end it. He's going to make game-wrecking plays consistently time and time again, whereas Jeffrey Simmons can make those. He can destroy linemen and have these crazy highlight reel plays, just doesn't do that at the rate you need from a true number one guy. But he's got a ton of power. He does have quickness. He's got rip moves. He can cross your face laterally. Again, they're still very, very happy and lucky to have Jeffrey Simmons. If someone else can emerge, he'll be a great part of a 1B type of package. But I think you get the point. He alone cannot a good pass rush make, if you follow the Yoda logic there. Now, as a run defender, I am continually impressed by Jeffrey Simmons. They ask a lot of him, and he plays his ass off. He's got wicked strength to just toss linemen aside. He can play the role of a penetrator. He can take on double teams. He can track down the ball from behind. Like, he does a lot of great stuff as a run defender. And the fact that he is such a great two-way player does cement him still in that superstar tier of players. And I cannot take that away from him. But besides him, you got these two other guys that we really like. And T'Vondre Sweat, to me, is quite clearly one of the ascending stars on this team. This is looking like a phenomenal draft pick, and he's a special player in the sense that he just provides a skill set that just hardly exists in the NFL. There's a very short list of names of guys that can be impactful 3-down nose tackles. You obviously have Dexter Lawrence, and then you're getting into like Vita Vea, what DJ Reader was in his prime. I think T'Vondre Sweat, and Eagles fans won't like this, but I think T'Vondre Sweat showed more in his rookie season than like Jordan Davis has in his 3 years for the Eagles as a former first-round pick. Like, he is a monster. He's a great athlete for such a big dude. Plays at like 355 pounds, but he defends the run not just with the size, but good raw strength. And pretty damn good technique. Like, it can be tough when you're getting double teamed to really hang in there. But he's got dead leg techniques. He keeps his pad level down. He peaks and sheds and finds the run. Awesome tape as a rookie nose tackle. There's just not a lot of guys that have come into the league and made the early impact at this position group that he has. And then he's showed some flashes as a rusher. If you do leave him one-on-one, there's some times where he can embarrass you. And that's where, like, if he can just take a little bit more of a step up in terms of getting off the ball, laying in his hands, having just a little bit more of a bull rush to his game, to the point that offensive lines are saying, shit, we can't really single team T'Vondre Sweat, then Jeffrey Simmons can get opened up. And that's not that much to ask. That's not that much of a stretch that could make a big difference for this team and could be one of the deciding factors of this defense taking a leap. So really an exciting tandem, and they play off each other so well because Simmons can nose tackle and take on double teams if he has to, but you want him as that 3-tech penetrating player. To have T'Vondre Sweat doing what he can do, it's just awesome. So a huge impact rookie pick. Love too that, he seems to have his head on his shoulders. He had the DUI right before the draft. It was a major red flag. It didn't end up hurting his draft stock. Seems he was just having a little bit of extra fun before getting to the league and hopefully maturing here. Not to defend DUIs. I have spoken out harshly against them in the past, and there's no defending it. That's a different story. But to see T'Vondre Sweat kind of maturing in front of our eyes, when there were some questions about, keeping his body in shape and some of the partying and stuff in college as well, it's cool to see him hopefully maturing here from the outside looking in is what it seems like. So really not a bad word to say about those two, just short of, I guess, questioning if Jeffrey Simmons is Chris Jones. But we get to Sebastian Joseph Day, who really had a nice bounce back season, man. When he was with the Rams early in his career, he was a nice player and got a big contract from the Chargers. Wasn't as good in a Brandon Staley defense. Surprise, surprise. But comes here, they find a good way to use him. He, comes in motivated and looks really, really nice. Was an impact run defender, a part of this interior group. And this is certainly up there for the best run defending interior trios in all of football. And that's where the meat and bones of good run defense start. And it's a big deal for the Titans to be able to get into third downs, let Denard Wilson in this scheme dial up some pass rushes. And it's a great building block for this defense, worth praising. Now, Joseph Day is not going to give you as much as a pass rusher. He's going to come off the field much more often on your pass rushing downs. But early down work will be heavy for Joseph Day. We can rip through the rest of the interior D-line depth. Just like most D-lines, although credit the Saints that we just did. They had a deep D-line, but you go 4 or 5 deep with any D-line, and it's going to fall off in the league. But James Lynch has played a decent bit at this point. He's more of a, 4-eye, 3-tech, kind of more undersized, penetrating type. But he's had some good snaps, and, he can do some of that stuff for these odd fronts that they will run. Keandre Coburn, another Texas product, big dude, decent enough backup to T'Vondre Sweat for what he is. And then Carlos Watkins gets brought in. He's played his role as a rotational veteran, adequate depth. And then they did bring in Cam Horsley along with 3 other interior undrafted players. But Cam Horsley, I thought, would get drafted. He was a good run defender at Boston College. So if he makes this team, wouldn't be surprised if he kind of climbs the ladder and is someone that, gets some run stops and you start to pay attention to him later in the season. So a nice pickup there. But unfortunately, you go to the edge group, and this is one of the worst edge rooms in the entire league, if not the worst. And that's a core reason why this is a C-graded pass rush, ranking 26th to 30th. You just don't have anybody that you can really count on to win one-on-one reps right now. Arden Key is their best pass rusher. Key is kind of stuck in between, like, really low-end number 2 edge rusher for me and, like, awesome number 3. He does do some good stuff. His development has impressed me, and especially as a run defender. He's been a very physical, high-motor player for someone that is a little bit lighter. But he's really good on twists and stunts. He's really athletic, excellent get off. He can run around the corner and kind of threaten that edge, force the QB to step up into these interior players. He's got a bull rush that is on and off. But ideally, he would be your number 3 on a really good defensive line, kind of as a rotational flamethrower. Not your best edge rusher, right? So that's a problem, just to begin with. And then I expect Key to play a lot, and then mostly a rotation with the other 3 guys. Obviously, Key can't play 100% of the snaps, but I think the majority of the rotation will be with these other guys who are all a little bit different. You got Draymond Jones, who's going to be kind of the de facto week 1 option there. He's been really disappointing the last couple of years for Seattle. They gave him a pretty hefty, like $15 million a year contract. Moved him to the edge, whereas he played more of a, penetrating interior kind of pass rush specialist type of role for Denver and was much better at that. That's what he did in college. The Seahawks asked him to stand up and play edge, and we're going to have to find out what the Titans want to do because they have that depth with the interior guys that we talked about. And normally I would say, well, it's a new coaching scheme is looking at Draymond and trying to get him back to what he used to do. I haven't heard too many signs yet that that's what they're going to do because this is the same system. Mike McDonald had him in Seattle, and I thought McDonald would have him put his hand in the dirt and play a lot more 4-eye. He didn't do it. So obviously, Denard Wilson and this staff, they're their own thinkers. They could see it differently, but like minds probably don't think differently in that conversation. And they are currently listing him as an edge player. So, having him in a 2-point stance as this edge linebacker, it just has not looked good. He hasn't been able to get that leverage as a rusher where he's got a rip move and can shoot gaps and stuff. But it's not that he never wins or can't overwhelm you with power or do anything good. But he was a cheap contract for a reason. He's going to be a rotational piece here and not much of a difference maker. And he just hasn't really been able to figure out, at least you would think he'd be better as a run defender in that role because he's oversized for an edge rusher. And he hasn't really taken on that element of his game. So I'm not the biggest fan of Draymond Jones. It's not the end of the world, but he'll be rotating with, Lorenzo Carter, who's complete Band-Aid, athletic veteran who plays hard, but athletic dude that never really developed any pass rush moves. He's the definition of a rotational, piece on a D-line. He is what he is. And I don't like that term, but it definitely applies to Lorenzo Carter. But Olu Oladipo is the guy you're really, eyeing and hoping he can emerge as a difference maker on this defensive line. And there's not a great track record with second-round edge rushers, but this was a uniquely talented edge rush class, and Oladipo got into the mix of this kind of cluster of second and early third-round prospects that you could make a case in a normal draft class would have been more viewed as late first, early second round caliber prospects, but all these guys kind of cannibalized each other's draft stock. And Oladipo is fascinating because he has all of the size, length, athleticism that you would look for in someone that has the traits at this position to become a impact player, and is a 1-year edge rusher. He was an off-ball linebacker for UCLA, which speaks to his athletic ability. And then they put him on the edge, which probably should have been done sooner because he looks like a real edge rusher. And he had a good year. I wouldn't say he had a great year, but he had a good year. He had a really nice cross chop and defended the run really well. He can take on blocks, and that linebacker background is a testament to his football IQ. He's a great coverage dropper, which this system is going to value because they do like to move these guys around and spot drop off the edge. Like, he's going to be a problem in that phase. But really, how he develops as a pass rusher is yet to be seen. I don't think he's going to be a dominant rookie as a pass rusher. I think it's going to take some time. But the traits are there. You want to see him develop a more consistent bull rush and then start to kind of really put a pass rush package together that doesn't quite exist yet. But it was a good pick. I like the player, and we'll see where it goes there. And then the rest of the edge depth is very mediocre. Jalen Harrell was, a 7th-round pick last year, along with Ali Gay, who was an undrafted pickup. Those guys hardly got on the field early and struggled when they did. And then you got Titus Leo, Desmond Evans. Those guys are all kind of in a competition for the 5th and 6th edge roster spots, maybe just 5 if we're being honest. But yeah, you can kind of see how it falls off after Jeffrey Simmons, especially from a pass rushing perspective. But I do definitely think they have more than enough from a run defense perspective. And then hopefully that will allow, number one, more true pass rushing opportunities for guys like Oladipo and Sweat to develop in those phases. And then obviously getting into spots where you can scheme up the pass rush really well as well and let Denard Wilson kind of shine and help out that unit. But let's move to the linebackers. It's one of the worst linebacking rooms in the league, ranking 29th for overall linebacker, and same rankings for both coverage and run defense. At least how they stack up with the league. So 29th to 30th for linebacker coverage, 29th to 30th for run defense with the linebackers, but a D+ grade for coverage and a C- grade for run defense. Really, the saving grace here is Cody Barton, which if Cody Barton's your saving grace, you're probably not in a great spot. But Cody Barton in year 5, year 6, joined the long list of kind of mid-round linebacker prospects that really figured things out 4 or 5 years into their career. And Barton had an awesome season last year under Vance Joseph in Denver, particularly as a run defender, really broke out on one of the best defenses in the league, right? Like he was getting to the ball at the line, really a consistent tackler. Like you could even argue the arrow should still be pointing up on Cody Barton because last year was such an outlier season on his career. Like, for example, I have a 79 run defense grade on him strictly off of last season. That would probably be in the 80s. Like, he was really that good. So if he can prove that again, you're going to view him as more of a bona fide stud run defending linebacker. But that's where the up and down yellow arrow comes in. Because it was just 1 year, there's always a chance of regression. You know, progression is not linear in the NFL. So there's a chance the first 4 or 5 years of him that there was a little bit more to his struggles than just, he need to figure things out. You know what I'm saying? So I like the signing. Good deal. Like 3-year, $22 million. This is exactly how I would be investing in linebacker, by the way, is waiting on a cheap veteran that kind of theoretically figures things out 4 or 5 years into his career. Someone that has the size and traits and adequate draft pedigree. Like Barton was a 3rd-round pick that a lot of people believed in Seattle. That's a great value contract on a guy like Barton. So I like the process. Is he a game changer or anything like that? I mean, if he can repeat what he did in run defense last year, he will help contribute to what could be a really special run defense here if everything comes together. But from a coverage angle, still not a ton to really credit Barton on in that phase. So definitely a better run defender than a coverage player, which is why the run defense grade for the linebacker room is a C- and the coverage grade is a D+. But obviously it getting dragged down there from Cody Barton, who's a solid player, has everything to do with the fact that the depth here is hilarious in what is a 3-way position battle right now for the LB2 job. Now, another just interesting note here ties back to what we said about them running penny fronts and 3 safety packages. Would not be surprised if they have some pretty major plans to make Kevin Winston Jr., their rookie safety, a big part of the linebacker room. I already listed the 3 position battle guys there on the screen there, so I ran out of space to kind of squeeze them in there on the graphic, but that's something to at least stash in the back of your mind, is like they might have plans beyond just this kind of motley crew position battle of young players. But these guys do have potential in their own right, and they're all a little bit different. You know, you got Otis Reese, who's an undrafted guy who he's got the edge in terms of experience. He's been on this team. This will be his 3rd season on the Titans. So he's been this undrafted, kind of undersized, scrappy type. Hasn't gotten too much opportunity to prove himself, but he's probably, I guess, entering in pole position 1, if that makes sense. I don't know that there's a clear favorite for any of these guys to win this job. But it's always fun to root for a guy like this. Would love for him to shatter expectations, but at, about 6'3", 220 at best, as low as 6'2", 215, depending on if he had Chipotle that day or not, I guess. It's just hard to imagine him surprising, but he's in the mix. And then you have Cedric Gray in year 2. He's a guy I liked. I thought, 4th round pick was kind of even a little bit later than I had him as a 3rd round guy, as someone that you bring in, develop, maybe 2-3 years down the road, could turn into a starter. He got on the field late last season. Didn't really feel like he knew what he was looking for out there. I thought he had a couple nice hits in the Colts game, but that's about it. Certainly could have gotten on the field more based on how I felt about him coming out. But not ready to give up on him quite yet. This position is extremely difficult to learn, and this is a good opportunity to compete for a spot. So he might be my pick to win this job, just based on my, let's just say, pre-draft opinions on these 3 players, because there's just not a ton of NFL tape on any of these guys to form real thoughts on. But yeah, I thought in college, Cedric Gray showed good zone IQ and good effort in the run game, just had to get better at getting off blocks and rounding out his game. So he's going to be certainly in the mix. He has the advantage in terms of draft pedigree, being a recent 4th round pick. And then James Williams was also drafted last season in the 7th round. And he's very fascinating because he is a very traitsy freak athlete type who played safety in college. So he's more of a sky's the limit, dumpster is the floor type of prospect. He ended up making some plays late last season as they were kind of throwing all these guys out there. But yeah, I mean, it's 6'5" if he can really fill out that frame, because he was 6'5", 215 coming out. If he can get that up to, 230, 6'5", 230, and really learn the position, there is actually like very interesting upside in a James Williams. So, all entirely unproven. It's a fascinating position battle. It'll be fun to see, who emerges. Competition breeds excellence. So I don't hate the process from the Titans. It's just, as we head into the year, we have Cody Barton, who's coming off a 1-year breakout, and 3 completely unproven players. Like, obviously that group's got to rank pretty low, but if you talked yourself into getting excited about what the finished product is going to be here, you could maybe make some sales pitches on that one. But as far as any other depth after that, Amari Burney, Anthony Orji, trade space developmental guys that at this point have bounced around the league, kind of throw them in line behind the other guys. Maybe we'll have a punter's chance at the competition. Curtis Jacobs, David Gabenda, kind of bigger name college prospects that the league clearly didn't view as highly on, both going undrafted. But yeah, there's your linebacker room. You're hoping Barton can at least raise the floor high enough that this room isn't a complete liability. That's still on the table if all of this position battle, doesn't result in any of these guys stepping up. This could still be a problem even with Barton there. And then you factor in the slim possibility, but it is a possibility that Barton maybe was a little bit of a fluky 1-year guy behind one of the better overall D lines in football last year for the Broncos. That's also a possibility too. So obviously not the best room, and they've got a lot of work to do until this unit can contribute towards the upside of this defense. But yeah, as I've said, having the weak part of your defense be your linebackers is not a good place to be, but if you got to have a weak link, that's kind of where you want it, if that makes sense. But let's move on to the secondary. And this is not a bad unit pending L'Jarius Sneed's health. L'Jarius Sneed's health is going to be probably the biggest wild card for this defense, at least, and one of the biggest wild cards for the team at large. Not just because he's a great player and, they spent a lot to get him. The 3rd round pick is not that much, but the contract they gave him was substantial. They're counting on him, man. They didn't really invest too much in this cornerback room. Really, I think they're really hoping he can get that quad healthy, get the knee fully recovered, because I think it was the knee that had kind of shown up as like questionable when Kansas City moved on from him. There was some kind of behind the scenes murkiness that we didn't really know about, and then it led to some lower body injuries when he played for the Titans. So it's just who the hell knows, man. And then even when he did play, you watched him and you were like, there's still the physicality. There's still some decent build-up long speed. But, this doesn't look like the freak athlete, dominant coverage player that the Titans thought they were getting. And maybe, he was dealing with some injuries. So he's just the definition of an injury-riddled wild card. He was a top 10 corner in the league at the moment they acquired him, though. They just, in their first season there, weren't able to get that out of him. So a very challenging player to project. If he's out there, this secondary rounds out really well with him as your number one and a legitimate number one corner. That's what he's paid to do. But if he gets hurt, everybody kind of gets pushed up the pecking order, and the depth really can get exposed quickly here. Not that Roger McCreary is bad. I like Roger McCreary quite a lot. I think he's a very good slot corner. There's a lot of really good slot corners in the league, but he's firmly inside the top 10. Very balanced, super heady player. He's gotten better at zone coverage since he's gotten into the league. He's a try-hard, steady run defender. Not the biggest guy to like really dominate the run game, but he'll make his presence felt. He'll hit you hard and tackle to the best of his ability. He's a floor-raising player, not a ceiling-raising player, if that makes sense. But you're certainly happy to have him here, no doubt. And then you have year 2, 5th-round rookie from last year, Jarvis Brownlee, who was sweet. Man, Jarvis Brownlee is a ton of fun to watch. And if he can just be your starting outside kind of number 2 corner and even like rotating a little bit with like Kevin Winston getting in the mix in 3 safety packages, where he's kind of not responsible for top receivers, but put into these quarter style zones with hopefully a better pass rush in front of him. And he can just ball hawk and, come down and defend the run and tackle underneath, but uses ball skills, uses instincts, play frisky. Some plays get away with pass interference, some plays not. The type, like, he is a frisky, annoying playmaking corner. He is not a great athlete. He's not that big. He's not a sticky coverage corner unless he's grabbing, which he's grabbing a lot. Shows on tape and was penalized 9 times on 508 coverage snaps last year. That's, he would fit in great with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, he's gonna play over aggressive and know that the refs aren't going to call it all the time. So that's who he is. He's a fun player, man. It's just, you can't let the expectations and the role for him get too big. But I still think the arrow can be pointing up on him, especially like zone defense, like really elevating that zone IQ to navigate his way in the front of passing lanes and be around the ball even more than he is. But again, L'Jarius Sneed goes down. McCreary's more of a slot guy. Brownlee having to be your number 1 corner, just like we saw last year. Like, he can't really hang against the better route runners in the league. Like, you can kind of pick on him at times as a true cover corner. And then after him, Darrell Baker, I do think filled in very valiantly as a backup when Sneed went down. I think with him as a emergency backup, there's teams that will be doing worse with their CB4 spot. Not too much of a playmaker or anything too exciting, but he's nice depth. They draft Marcus Harris in the 6th round. I didn't end up getting around to writing up Marcus Harris. That would have been the 3rd time I had to revisit the Cal secondary, and his name showed up very late in the draft process. Obviously goes in the 6th round here, but 24-year-old vet, 5'11", 190 pounds, kind of a heady guy, kind of in the Jarvis Brownlee mold maybe a little bit. We'll see what they can get out of him as a 6th round pick. And then you got Amani Oruwariye, who's bounced around the league, definition of a Band-Aid backup veteran, and then 5 other sort of undrafted types competing in this secondary. It's just a very standard NFL cornerback depth group. Not a dangerously bad depth, but no one you're super excited about stepping in the likely event that L'Jarius Sneed gets hurt, right? So that definitely needs to be factored in. But I will say, man, and we'll talk about the real 2 starting safeties here in a second. There's not a ton to say about Amani Hooker and Xavier Woods anyway, but the beauty of drafting Kevin Winston inside of this system is not just all of the cool schematic flexibility it gives you and all the stuff we said in the scheme portion about having a big nickel that can really dominate the run. McCreary's a nice run defender, but if Winston hits his upside, it's something like what Derwin James is able to do for the Chargers. And I know that's very high praise, but I think that highly of Kevin Winston. He just fell in the draft because he's coming off a partially torn ACL, but he's going to be ready to go. He ran at a private workout. He ran a 4.5, 6 months removed from a partially torn ACL. So I'm not too worried about that. He's a really exciting prospect. But the other, among many benefits of drafting a player like this in this system is, okay, let's say L'Jarius Sneed does get hurt again, and the kind of degenerative lower body issues that the Chiefs were worried about prove to be a problem. Well, you can put Roger McCreary outside. He's done it. He's better as a slot, but he's adequate as an outside corner. Better than Darrell Baker or any of these other guys. So you can stick him outside and make Kevin Winston your nickel and use him like Denard Wilson would have used Kyle Hamilton in Baltimore. He acts in many ways as an insurance policy to L'Jarius Sneed. You know what I'm saying? So I love that pick for that reason. And then if L'Jarius Sneed is healthy, there's a variety of different ways you can still do 3 safety packages to get Winston on the field. If it's a dime package, you can take one of those bad linebackers off the field and go with 6 defensive backs. You can take Jarvis Brownlee off the field for early down work, slide McCreary outside, and use Winston as more of a run defense nickel package. And then you can get into some of those penny fronts as well, where he could either be the nickel corner, or you could even, take Xavier Woods off the field if you're in more 2 safety packages as well and want more run support there. So I do think we see a lot of Kevin Winston Jr. just because of what I think of him. Overall, just heavy hitter, great speed, great size, playmaking instincts. He's over aggressive right now. There's a lot to coach into him in terms of zone eyes and playing more balanced zone coverage, but he can man up tight ends. I think he's got the athleticism to man up some of the bigger slot receivers in the league. Really an exciting pick. Again, one of the biggest steals in this entire draft, in my opinion, and someone I'm really excited to see if he can become one of the core building blocks of this entire Titans defense, similar to what the Seahawks are hoping for from Nicky Manwari, similar to what we've seen from Derwin and Kyle Hamilton. And I know that's high praise, but I think the upside is there for him to do that. So really excited there. These other 2 safeties are like literal NPCs to me. Like, not to be harsh, but if you could say what's the most basic, adequate, useful but unsubstantial like split safety tandem in the league, I would say Amani Hooker and Xavier Woods as a balanced duo. Yeah, that's about right. Like, I like both these players for what they are. Amani Hooker's super heady. He's got good size. Some tackling issues really showed up last season that kind of came out of nowhere, so got to get that cleaned up. He's not the most athletic, rangy coverage defender, but he will have some ball hawking interceptions and impact some games in that sense where he, as a buzz defender or crashing down from a free safety alignment, like he can take risks and capitalize on it, which is great. But not like a lockdown coverage defender or anything like that. So just like really stable, good starting safety. Probably not going to be anything more than that. Not really going to be anything less than that. And then Xavier Woods is kind of in that same breath. He hasn't quite been the ball hawk that Amani Hooker has been, and he's a little bit smaller from a run defense perspective. But overall, pretty fluid mover, pretty smart coverage player, decent ball skills, decent tackler, like nice veteran signing that'll allow you to get into 3 safety packages, which they definitely want to do. And then before Kevin Winston became available in the 3rd round, I think they felt like Mike Brown could get involved in that role. I just don't know that opportunity is going to be there now that Kevin Winston's coming in. But Mike Brown himself is like 6'1", 220, had some impressive tackling moments last year. And, he's a nice piece to have. And he played some free safety too. So like he's adequate depth. He did some nice stuff last year, deserves a shout out. And then you get into kind of undrafted depth that probably won't even make this team after Mike Brown. But yeah, it's a good secondary, man. It's just, if you could promise me L'Jarius Sneed would stay healthy, I'd probably rank this group a tier higher with more of a B grade. They finished with a B- grade, again, ranking 16th to 21st for the coverage unit. And then the run support here, again, is really solid. It's not tier 1, at least until Kevin Winston can prove he's an elite run defender in that role. Everyone else is just pretty damn good at it. So it's a B grade for the DB run support as well. And a nice way to round out the roster breakdown on the Titans. So the defense doesn't grade out great right now. That lack of pass rush, the questions at linebacker, still some of the unprovenness with the coaching staff. Like, they're still getting there. I think they can exceed 27th. Hell, they did last year. It's just kind of where they're at right now. But they did come in 19th for run defense. The linebackers obviously holding them back big time there. And if whoever ends up LB2 can emerge as just a solid piece there, you are very likely talking about a top 10 run defense. It's tough when you have one of the worst linebacker rooms in the league. It is tough to be a great run defense, but they have all the other pieces. They have the right scheme for it. They have the D line for it. They have the defensive back support, which could be even better if Kevin Winston can emerge as a superstar there. But really good starting foundation for the run defense. Pass defense, as you would expect, much lower, 29th for pass defense. It's just, I'm a big pass rush guy, and this team still lacks that pass rushing element. But yeah, 27th for overall defense. As far as the special teams is concerned, the Titans don't project well, and they didn't perform well last year. We have our formula here with mostly objective metrics, which are like your PFF and DVOA team grades, PFF grades, mostly objective metrics. And then I give a grade for returner and for the overall team and culture. But the Titans just don't project well for special teams. They come in 31st for the special teams projection. It only plays a 1% of the final overall formula because special teams is very tough to predict. But as you go through it, they're swapping kicker and punter. They got a great year out of Nick Folk last year. They're going with Joey Sly, who was literally average, the 16th ranking kicker, averaged out over the last couple of years. Johnny Hecker is not as highly ranked, 27th for the punter grade. He's definitely on the decline. Formerly, Pro Bowl caliber guy, but not that anymore. Complete unknown with the returners, right? You got some rookies that might be in the mix. We don't even know who the hell is going to be returning kicks for them. So they came out towards the bottom of the league for the return grade. And then, they didn't grade out well for DVOA or PFF special teams last year. 32nd for DVOA, 27th for the PFF team grade. And then I don't have a high culture grade on them as a team yet. So that's how you end up 31st. There's just not a lot to be excited about with the special teams. Hopefully they can exceed that ranking though. To wrap all of this up for a 31st ranked Titans team, this team feels much more like a team that can exceed this 31st ranking, unlike the Saints, in my opinion. There's a lot of exciting young pieces, but for how we do it in this series where all these guys, they're coming in, we're ranking these guys at their floor. They have a lot to prove. The coaching has a lot to prove. The quarterback has a lot to prove. You're going to end up ranking towards the bottom here, but I'm not going to say the Titans could be a playoff team. Crazier things have happened, but do they have the foundations of a team that you could be legitimately excited for heading into 2026 if Cam Ward looks really good? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm fully prepared to get gotcha'd by Titans fans looking back at this 31st ranking and saying, you idiot. It's like, well, yeah, but that's the context. That's where we're at right now, and hopefully they exceed it. I really hope they do. I'm kind of, I like a lot of these players. I'm pulling for all these players, and I would love for them to exceed the 31st ranking. But as we kind of summarize the strengths and weaknesses, right now there's just not a long list of strengths for this team. For me, it's really just D-line run defense. I think if you could guarantee me health from L'Jarius Sneed, I would say the secondary is a strength, but you can't do that. That's why in the wild cards portion, you see L'Jarius Sneed's health is a huge wild card, because if Sneed is good to go, like I said, that's a strength. If he's not good to go, you could argue secondary is a weakness. So huge wild card there. But at the same time, there's not a lot of glaring weaknesses for the Titans, which I think is a good thing. Weaponry relative to the rest of the league is a weakness. It's not a horrible room as we talked about. You just need some young players to step up and some things to go right for you. Linebackers, it's going to get a long way to go for that to not be a weakness, but it's possible with that LB2 spot. And then the pass rush, again, I do think it's a weakness. Jeffrey Simmons can't be your only good pass rusher, man. So that's probably the one spot where it's like, they're a year away from having an impactful pass rush, at least from the roster. I think the scheme can do some stuff there. But in terms of some of the other pivotal factors here, obviously the rookie quarterback. Look at the Commanders last year, man. Jaden Daniels sure as hell did not project as what he finished, right? And that changed the entire outlook for the Commanders. If Cam Ward is just the next Jaden Daniels, the next young Herbert or Burrow, like, Yeah, the Titans are going to shatter this ranking, and I hope he does. Offensive coaching. I think we spoke relatively pessimistic about Coach Callahan, but I also don't think he had too much of an opportunity to shine in his rookie season. So can he prove that he was a good hire, that he can elevate this offense? And then the young weapons. If one or two or hell, all three of those rookie wide receivers, plus even a Gunnar Helm, maybe to be a fourth piece there. If those guys can really step in and be impactful rookies, that could really change the landscape of the explosiveness of this offense. But let's take a look at the schedule before we get to the interview with James Foster here. The Titans do actually have a pretty tough schedule. I have them favored in just 2 games. They get New Orleans at home, who we ranked already, obviously. New England being the other team at home. The Mike Vrabel rematch should be a good one, but I do think with home field, that's either a pick 'em or a favorite. I'll give them the favorite on that one. But beyond that, really underdogs all across the board. The AFC South isn't that hard of a division, but it's not a pushover. But they run into the NFC West, which is a really tough draw. Should be pretty big underdogs against all those teams, really. The Rams, the Cardinals, the Seahawks, the Niners. They draw the AFC West, which is pretty damn good with the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Broncos. They have to start at Denver. Week 1 is not going to be easy. It's not going to be a friendly environment for Cam Ward to start his career. So, we aren't exactly projecting a ton of wins for this Titans team. I think the Vegas over-under right now at 5.5 wins is right on the money. I see this as a 5 or a 6 win football team, which, as we know, could really go either way. Ultimately, I don't think how many games this Titans team wins matters all that much. It's what the games look like. Does the offense take the right step? Do we see some of the promise on the defensive side that we've alluded to? And are you excited about the 2026 Titans, or did it not go well and you're looking for a new coach for Cam Ward and kind of kickstarting things again next year? That's kind of your spectrum, I think. Maybe a 1%, 2, 3, 5% scenario where a lot of things go right and you're a surprise 9-10 win wild card team. But I don't think putting that type of hope into your brain as a Titans fan is likely to make you happy. I would go in with more realistic expectations than that. Doesn't mean it can't be a fun season that leaves you excited. But speaking of excited, really stoked to welcome James Foster back to this deep dive series. James is doing some good work. He was with the 33rd team who had to make some really tough decisions with some of the most talented analysts in the industry. And right now he's doing some writing and he's rebuilding his YouTube platform, but we love having James on. Genuinely one of my favorite people to just talk ball with. Great evaluator of talent and always a pleasure to have James on the channel. So we are now going to roll the interview with the talented James Foster. James, welcome back to the Titans Deep Dive. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great, man. I'm glad we were able to make it work with the schedule this year. Hated to miss it last year.
I know. Unfortunately, I had to tell you and about 5 or 6 other guests, like, hey, between going to Europe and moving to Charlotte, I'm running out of time to get some of these guest interviews in. But happy to have you back. You're genuinely one of my favorite people to talk ball with. So excited to talk some Titans here. I wanted to start off just with some Cam Ward discussion here. Where did you end up? I'm assuming he was your QB1, but how high did you end up on Cam Ward before he was a Titan, even though we knew he was a Titan in like February? But anyway, how did he kind of stack up against previous year's QB1s, just to kind of paint that picture for Titans fans?
So Cam Ward was 12th on my board, and I checked before this, actually ended up with the exact same grade as I did on JJ McCarthy. Okay. So I guess it would have come down to the interviews, whoever I liked more. But yeah, right in that JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Will Levis tier of quarterback prospect. So some good players and some not as good players, but like definitely somebody that I think has a realistic chance of being a top 12 quarterback, which is kind of like my baseline metric for what constitutes a first round grade in my view. Um, I think like, everybody has thoroughly discussed like his game. I don't need to start from square one. Like
Right.
obviously the play extension ability, the arm talent, you get some reckless decision making. He had the exact same turnover worthy play rate for his college career as Will Levis did. So like that is a little bit of a concern, but I'm willing to overlook it because he does kind of offset it with so many big time throws and everything. I think really the one point of difference for me with some other people with Cam Ward is I was less impressed with his deep accuracy. I thought that was
Mhm.
a pretty real issue for him. And, so that along with the decision making those are the two things that I'll be looking for him to improve. But I think he played the two best games that I've seen him play were the final two games of the 2024 season. And it's funny because I think kind of the casual college football fan, like I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw someone talk about how like him sitting out the second half of the bowl game is like would have him off of their board. And it's like, it's just so completely opposite to the effect that had on me. Cause like he was dealing against Iowa State and then, they
Mhm.
lost to Syracuse and got knocked out of the playoffs. But I thought in terms of working from the pocket and like hitting backside digs and stuff, that was one of his most impressive tapes. So yeah, I'm optimistic for the future of Cam Ward. I would have taken the package from New York and
Okay.
gotten a future first, rolled with Abdul Carter, but I think Ward would have been my second choice probably.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the main reason I think he's not at least going to be Will Levis is he has like elite pocket presence for a
Right.
college prospect, whereas that was Will Levis's like biggest issue was just feeling the rush. So I think that's at least like that raises the floor in my opinion for a
Definitely.
quarterback. Um, So you mentioned you would have taken the package. That kind of ties into my next question here about Brian Callahan, because I think year one for him was very just kind of lackluster. I didn't really have strong takeaways other than I didn't notice too much that got me excited about Brian Callahan. So my question for you is, do you think it's fair to say he's actually on the hot seat this year? And I guess you don't have to spend too much time on this, but could that potentially be a reason why they kind of jumped the gun and took the quarterback now?
Well, I think he's definitely on the hot seat. Um, and I said I would take the trade package if I was Brian Callahan. I would be pushing for them to take Cam Ward because that's kind of the only
Yeah.
realistic path towards him saving his job. Um, I agree with you. I think lackluster is probably the best word to describe it. Like it was I think well designed NFL offense. I think he's a solid offensive coordinator. I didn't really have too many schematic issues. I'm not usually a blame the offensive coordinator guy. I
Yeah.
think some fans kind of overstate how many truly bad offensive and defensive coordinators there are. But to me, the most concerning issue was just a lack of resiliency that the team showed to like close out games,
Mm,
which can sometimes be a kind of fluky, like low sample size thing, but you consistently saw them heading into into the third quarter, like 14-14, and then something goes wrong, whether it's Will Levis auditioning for Dude Perfect or like, it was a bad roster. Like there, plenty of players made mistakes. And so, you'd have a turnover, you give up a big play. And then it was like after a few games, you kind of saw the trend. It's like everybody knows, yeah, they're going to collapse here and then end up losing 27-14. And that's kind of how most of their games went. And that's the kind of thing that I think is the easiest to pin on coaching. And so you
mhm.
want to see them be able to close out some of those tough games, even though I'm not super like they got to win now. Like this is not the season for the
Right.
Titans. But want to see some growth there. And but I am willing to give him a chance with another quarterback because outside of a solid like 4 or 5 game stretch last year, Will Levis was pretty awful.
Yeah, for sure. I think the big thing for Callahan too that definitely ties into finishing games is just like what's the identity? What the hell is a
Right.
Brian Callahan offense? Like, it's cool to have this multiple background and be able to push a bunch of different buttons, but when push comes to shove, like, you got to have something that you actually do well. Did you see anything that you felt schematically the Titans actually did well? Or, I mean, my takeaway is it just felt like if things were working, it just felt kind of random. I'm curious if you saw anything he was doing well schematically.
Yeah, it is kind of a best hits offense in terms of the concepts that they use. I think the most impressive part to me was I like some of their run game design, but that's kind of like that's his dad more, who I think he
Mm,
has a closer or a more prominent role in designing the run game. And I didn't think the execution of the run game, especially on like more exotic stuff like screens, I didn't think that was very good.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's hard because Levis was pretty consistently a tick low to like see things and not a great anticipatory thrower. Um, he was, I think, pretty accurate last year, which was a positive development from college. But I'm like I said, I'm willing to give him another chance with a better quarterback. But yeah, you want to see a more like clearly defined identity for sure.
Yeah. So let's transition now to talk about this wide receiver room, which is very fascinating. Right now, like Our Lads has it listed with Van Jefferson as a starter. I think we probably both agree that that's going to phase out here. If you disagree, you can definitely let me know. But how do you see the kind of snap split going here? Do you think it's like full go with Tyler Lockett as wide receiver two? How much of these different rookies do you see kind of getting out there? It's a very crowded room right now, so I'm curious how you break it all down.
Right. So obviously you've got Calvin Ridley as kind of the one sure thing who
Yep.
very slow start to the season, but played awesome down the stretch. I think,
Mhm.
that ended up being a really good acquisition. And so I feel
He
great
was
about
money,
him.
by the way, for underdog. I was just taking his over on receptions
Oh,
like
really?
straight weeks, and like they never changed it. And it was just like, sweet. Like this is automatic.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Calvin Ridley. Just a great blend of being that intermediate separator, but also having some vertical juice. He's kind of like the
Mhm.
definition of a high end two in my eyes. And then the rest of the rotation, it's ideally as many young players are able to find the field as possible because um, when I was watching free agents like before they actually signed. Um, I think I wrote something and I was like, "What do you want the Titans to do at receiver?" And I was like, "Anyone but Van Jefferson." So yeah, I mean, it was some of the least impressive receiver tape that I can remember. So I hope he gets phased out. Tyler Lockett like is still kind of a solid player. Knows where to sit down in zones and has reliable hands. But I think there was a noticeable drop off in his athleticism last year. Um, I think they did a great job given the draft capital they had. They lost the third round pick with the L'Jarius Sneed trade, and
Mhm.
so they had to kind of push everything down a notch and invest in receiver in day three. But I think they took really smart swings. Like Elikai Manor was somebody who I was kind of lower on throughout the entire process. I mean, I would he was mocked pretty frequently at 34 to the Titans, which
Mhm.
thought was way too high. But if we're talking about him at the end of the fourth round, that's absolutely a shot that's worth taking. He's kind of an enigma because like if you're a Titans fan and like they drafted Elikai Manor, you went and watched his highlights on YouTube. I just have to say that is kind of not really a
Right.
representation of who he is as a player. Because if you watch his best moments, you think he's like this big ball winner down the sideline, but the success rate at the catch point was really disappointing. And really what you're looking at with him is kind of the size explosiveness combination and being a developmental X that could run a pretty, I think, advanced route tree. So a developmental player, but I'm optimistic about him. And then Shamir DK, was a little bit of a reach based on my board, but it's one of those picks where even though there's a big difference between my ranking and where he went, when I saw his name pop up on the screen, I was like, oh, okay, I could see a team valuing him like really early day 3.
Yeah.
It's just
Oh,
a
we
really
saw that run. We saw that run of
right.
like 4 deep threats went at the top of the 4th round. And I mean, personally, I thought he was the first guy I would have taken out of that group, him or Thornton.
Yeah, I definitely preferred him to Thornton. They're both really specialized skill sets, but
Mhm.
they're specialized roles in the NFL. So I think that he'll be able to hopefully work his way into the lineup. And then Restrepo is kind of a wild card. Um, I wasn't like as high on him. He had a lot of day 2 hype before the 40-yard dash. I was way off base with that, but I didn't my opinion didn't change based on his 40-yard dash. I think that was
Yeah.
pretty clearly an injury thing, and like you're not drafting him for his speed. So I think could be a capable NFL starter. I don't really see too much more than that, but should have a chance to fight for a roster spot.
I'll put you on the spot. Who has more receiving yards this year out of the rookies?
I'll go with Shamir DK probably. I think
Okay.
I think he could be a guy that has like 600 yards maybe, but
Okay.
ranks like 3rd in yards per catch,
Yeah.
Um, just
I'm excited to see him. Like we talked about Brian Callahan show us a little something. Like that's the guy you got to scheme up, get him those deep
right.
targets. So I like that pick. Okay, what about receptions this year?
I would probably go with I'll go Restrepo, man. I don't know. Yeah,
Okay,
I think Restrepo. I think they could be like
it's a good
opposite
shot
ends
there.
of the spectrum. Like DK's putting up like 1 reception for 33 yards, and Restrepo's putting up some Wandale Robinson numbers, like
Some 4
8
for
for
13
60.
stat lines.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna keep these coming. Who leads the team in receiving yards in 2026? All of the receivers.
Oh, all the receivers? I would go Calvin Ridley for sure.
Oh, Okay, after Calvin Ridley then.
After Calvin. Hey, we'll go with the other guy, Elikai Manor.
Yeah.
The Travis Hunter Achilles heel. We'll be excited to watch those matchups in the AFC
Uh-huh.
South.
Absolutely.
Um, I mean, he's really got to like clean up a lot of the intricacies of the position, but he's one of the youngest players in this class, or at least in this receiver class, and um, a lot of promising upside there to develop. So I'll go with Manor.
Okay, you're hedging all your bets with all 3
Yeah.
rookies. I like how you do it. Okay, the other offensive player I want to ask you about or receiving target is Chiga Okonkwo. I thought he showed some good moments later in the season, but do you think he kind of is what he is at this point, or is there a little bit of optimism from you for a contract year 4 breakout?
I think there's a chance he could kind of return to maybe 80% of what he was as a rookie, like as kind of a complimentary flex tight end
Mhm.
that can do some nice stuff with the ball in his hands. He I think is just extremely limited in terms of his role because he can't survive as an inline blocker, and
Yeah,
they're an 11 personnel heavy team. um, there are times where they'll try to like put him on the line of scrimmage and just run inside zone, and he's getting launched into the backfield by a defensive end. So that really limits how extensive his role can be because he can really only see the field in 12 personnel. But was really efficient as a rookie, and then had drop issues in his second year, but mostly cleaned those up last year. Like you said, he had it was the last game of the season, right, where they were just feeding him targets after had been kind of an
yeah.
afterthought for most of the year. So I think probably like the 3rd or 4th option in Tennessee's passing game, but considering that this regime didn't draft him, I don't really see him getting anything more than, maybe he has a nice year and they give him like a 1 or 2 year deal, but I don't think he's going to
Sure.
be a big long-term contract or anything.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the last offensive player I want to ask you about is JC Latham. I certainly was not too high on that pick. But what were your general kind of thoughts from his rookie season? What are your expectations for him moving forward at right tackle now?
Yeah, I would say I was content with his rookie season. I think if we really just look at it by games, like he had 2 really bad performances. The first week
Let
1
me
against
let me
Chicago.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
week 1 and then Will Anderson, right? One of the
right.
2
Yeah,
Texans
the first
matchups?
first
Yeah.
Texans matchup.
Yeah.
Man, after that Bears game, I was like, I really fell for another Bama offensive lineman that's gonna bust. We drafted the Chance Warmack tackle
Right.
version, who's actually a guard maybe. But then like really bounced back. I think faced a relatively challenging slate of pass rushers, and outside of those 2 games, I thought it was like really good tape. Quality first round tackle tape. Um, I was writing an article on JC Latham, and it was I was having a difficult time kind of um, consolidating, like coming up with a synopsis that is digestible in a 1,500 word article, because there's so
Yeah.
much conflicting information on his tape. Like there's times where he looks like a way better athlete than I thought he did at Bama. Like his biggest issue to me at Bama was, cinder block feet when he was trying to
Yeah.
mirror inside counters. But that was, I mean, he had some really impressive reps in that area last year. And then there's other times where he looks closer to kind of the athlete that he was in college. And so just a really up and down player. And I'm never a guy that like puts too much stock into off-season body transformation stories, like he's in the best shape of his life or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot that's come out recently about how he was playing at 360, 370 for that. He mentioned specifically that first Houston game, and has dropped 30 pounds. So my philosophy with those kind of things is like, let's see how it translates to the tape. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of reason for optimism, and he's got experience at both tackle spots. I don't see a big gap between his ability at different sides. So I think I feel good about him, that he's at least going to be a solid starter, and he's got upside to reach another level for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you brought up that point about his athleticism, because I think that's what I struggle with the most with him, and have back to college. It's like exactly like you said, like some plays it looks like he's moving really well for a big guy, and other plays it's like, dude, you can't pick up your feet. So that would definitely be the biggest thing, like you said. So I think that was well put. Get more consistency there. All right, just really one question about the defense here. Obviously, the LB2 situation is up in the air slash a mess, depending on how you want to break that down. Um, so I guess part A of this question is, do you think they'll like bring someone else in before the season starts? Or do you think it is a complete competition here between Otis Reese, James Williams, and Cedric Gray? And then what do you think of those 3 players, and who would be kind of your pick to win that position battle?
So I generally like the amount of investment that the Titans have put into the linebacker position in recent years. Outside of
Mhm.
Rashawn Evans, they've done a pretty good job of kind of like churning through day 3 picks, whether it's David Long, Jayon Brown, and under investing in linebacker is usually a smart strategy. Like, the Rams have
Mhm.
cleaned up on day 3 linebackers, but it can be a dangerous game, because if you're the 28th best linebacker room, you can survive there, but then like at a certain point it can really kind of ruin your defense.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, it's dangerous, like I said. But
There's
I
a
like
line. There's a very like it's a cliff. Like
right.
that's really well said. Like you
Like
could get up to like push 29th, but if you are at 30th and you are just dog shit, like it ruins your defense. Like totally.
like if I was a GM, I'm not sure how much I would pay to go from like the 28th to the 12th best linebacker room. I don't think that's a
Yeah.
huge thing, but like 28th to 32nd, that
Yeah.
to me is maybe a more
Which is what
severe
the
drop
Cody
off.
Barton signing is.
Right. Yeah, and I liked Cody Barton. I think he's a well-rounded player. And then as far as adding someone else, I mean, they might, but they don't have any proven options, but they do have a lot of dart throws at least. And I would add David Gabinda, the UDFA out of Texas, who I didn't watch his college tape, but I know some people really liked him, and he could be a guy that fights for a roster spot. If I had to pick for linebacker 2, I would probably go with James Williams out of Miami.
Mm.
Because I feel most confident in his ability to get off of blocks. Like he's a, a strange player because former 5-star safety. And
Yeah.
like you watch him at Miami, he's not a safety caliber athlete, but they move him to linebacker. He's a really physical downhill presence, has elite arm length, and really good job of stacking and shedding at the second level. He's got to obviously like improve his instincts, and I think that he's not as fluid moving laterally and like redirecting as you would like, but I'd probably go with James Williams. It's hard. I mean, they basically gave all of their kind of depth linebackers like 2 games at the end of last year.
Yeah.
Very unimpressed with what Cedric Gray showed. That I think might be a whiff on their part and my part, because I thought he was a decent
I liked
prospect.
him too.
And then Otis Reese is kind of like in that David Long mold of an undersized, high energy, like nose for the football kind of guy. So wouldn't surprise me. I think you're probably going to see different combinations for sure. But gun to my head, I'd take James Williams.
Okay, cool. No, good breakdown. Could also be a deal where they get to week 3 of the preseason and they're like, yeah, we got to go sign
Right.
somebody else because this isn't working. All right, so one last big question: the Titans over under at 5.5. I'm gonna start keeping track of my guests' records on this and
Okay.
see if my guests can at least finish above 500 picking the over under. So where are you going? Over under 5.5 on the Titans this year.
Do people ever pick the under for their team?
It's
I don't always
rare.
watch the
I've
guests
seen
interviews.
it. I think Arif did it once for the Vikes, but he's had about 6
I
years
think
of opportunities to do that.
I remember I think in 2023 I came on here. I think I picked the under also, and like I had like multiple people just like I got like hate DMs for that. That's the most
So
like criticism.
disappointed in you. You're
But
supposed to be here to represent.
I would honestly probably guess 5 games, so I'll go with the under. I think this pass rush is going to be a tough watch. Like they've got
Yeah.
just a bunch of number 3 edge rushers, and between Arden Key, Draymond Jones, and then I liked Oladejo as a prospect, but he's got to figure out something besides a cross chop that he can use. So yeah, I think pass rush, whatever you think about Cam Ward, it's hard to bank on a rookie quarterback coming in and immediately being great. Receiver room is pretty lackluster. And then like offensive line, this is the first time in years that I've felt like they have a realistic shot of being a good O-line, but like that's absolutely something that they've got to prove before I would feel confident putting any money on that being a good unit. So I'll go with the under. Hate to do it.
One last quick question just hit me as you were talking there. Do you think Jeffrey Simmons is a good enough pass rusher to be a 1?
No. So that's the thing. Jeffrey Simmons is the best player on on Tennessee's roster. I think he's just his overall career has been a slight disappointment as a pass rusher. At his best, I do think he's kind of a top 5 to top 7 kind of guy. Like he's had just over the course of his career, he's had a lot of really dominant 5-game stretches.
Mhm.
But he's had multiple seasons where he was like starting to really put it all together and ended up, getting injured and then playing through an injury. And like he's just never been able to stack an entire season um, together, like as a pass rusher. If you look at his, like you can just pull it up on PFF. Like look at his 2022 season. You can do it now or after, and like try to guess when he got injured. You can do that at multiple points throughout his career. So it's just been he has really good games and really good plays, but counting on him as a high volume pass rusher that's going to offset such a bad edge room, I don't feel good about that.
Yeah, well said. All right. Thank you so much, James. What do you got coming down the pipeline here that people can go check out?
Yeah. So writing for Wide Left now, just did the longest thing I've ever written in my life on the 2024 receiver class. Ended up writing basically like 13 full articles just about each player. So definitely check that out. And a lot of Titans content at paulkaharski.com, doing in-depth breakdowns and player profiles of the few like young building blocks that they have. They really have like 4 or 5 players on their roster that you could see being on the team 3 or 4 years from now, but gonna cover as much of those guys as possible.
Yeah. Well, and here's hoping this draft brings a handful
Yep.
of more names to that list next year. I did like their draft, but awesome, James. Thank you so much for coming on. You're one of our favorite guests every year, so this was great, and we'll see you all later.
Always a pleasure.
And that is all we have. Thank you, everybody, for watching this Titans deep dive. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think the Titans shatter this 31st ranking here? What do you think I missed in this series? Any footnotes you want to add in the comments down below? Let us know. And then lastly, who do you think's coming next with the number 30 spot in these power rankings? Overall, thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. If you're still watching and you haven't hit it, I genuinely don't know what you're doing. So hit that like button down below. It really does help. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our remaining 30 deep dives throughout the next few months. But thank you for watching. We'll see you later.